Welcome to the International Academy of Dispute Resolution World Mediation Congress, cooling off a heated planet, our third day here. And our virtual site here today will be Bhopal, India, at our host school, National Law Institute University in Bhopal, India. We've been there on site in years past, and this time this virtual flavor, if you will, of this World Congress. We welcome them and thank you for hosting this tournament. Not tournament, this World Congress. We usually do tournaments, I'm sorry. I would introduce also my co-moderator. I'm a board member, first of all, of the INADR, proud board member, and certainly happy and excited to be part of this tremendous event. If anything, the word of the day is, and the word of the last 3 days is clearly resilience. I'm amazed at what people have been able to do in my small part of any of this. I'm proud and delighted to be part of it. So with that, I will introduce my co-moderator today, RAYANA MUKHERJEE. She is, I'll let her introduce herself and tell her what her role is at NLIU and where she is. I am, first of all, virtually everywhere, but here today in Chicago, Illinois, my home office here, are based here. So RAYANA, tell us who you are and where you're from and what your role is. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, John, and a very good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone from wherever you're tuning in today. As John already said, I will be John's co-moderator for this wonderful World Mediation Congress, and I would like to extend my sincerest thank you to INADR for reaching out to us yet again and for allowing us to host this wonderful conference. Today, I am not just here as a representative of the National Law Institute University, located in Bhopal in India, but also as a part of the Alternative Dispute Resolution Cell, which is an organization formed within the scope of the university to further and encourage research and education in mediation and negotiation. Bhopal, as some of you may know or many of you may not know, is located right in the heart of India. But I am tuning in from Calcutta today, which is where I live. I know we have a lot of interesting topics to cover today, and I am incredibly excited for the same. So without further ado, I'm just going to let John take over for now.
Thank you, RAYANA. Thank you, RAYANA. It's wonderful to see you again. Literally, it's still amazing. Literally the other side of the world from where I'm at sitting here today, and the capabilities are amazing nowadays. It's noteworthy to say that. So it's my pleasure at this point to introduce our current president, Dennis Favaro. He is the president of the International Academy of Dispute Resolution, which is the oldest mediation organization in the world of its kind. And you can see the mission of our statement, mission of our organization behind him in a few minutes, and I'll let Dennis fill you in a little more. But this is the oldest organization in the world of its type and the oldest organization in India. We're proud to have co-partnered with NLIU Bhopal for the last 10 years, I believe it is now, in bringing mediation and mediation techniques and training and law school international tournament to Bhopal. It's well regarded in India, and we're proud to be a part of it. And this last year, we've really cemented our relations and commitments to each other here, and it's been tremendous to work with students. In fact, this year we've seen more of them virtually than we usually do once a year when we go to Bhopal. So it's wonderful. So at this point, I would like to introduce Dennis Favaro for some comments and opening comments. He's the president of INADR. Dennis?
Yes, thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to day 3, the final day of the Mediation Congress of the International Academy of Dispute Resolution. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Academy. Every 2 years, the Academy presents a World Congress, which is an opportunity for mediators, educators, lawyers, jurists, legal professionals, students, and others interested in dispute resolution from across the globe to convene and discuss topics of interest. This Congress is unique from other past World Congresses in that this one is being convened virtually and is available literally to a global audience. This Congress has taken place from 3 venues over the last 2 days. On Wednesday, the Congress was hosted by Loyola University School of Law, Chicago. Miklas Romeris University, Vilnius, Lithuania, hosted the Congress yesterday, and the National Law Institute University, Bhopal, India, is hosting the Congress today. These universities and law schools are the academic partners of the Academy for this World Congress. They have made this World Congress possible and the success that it has already achieved. In today's Congress, you will again be joined by world-renowned moderators and dispute resolution scholars, educators, lawyers, and other professionals. They will be discussing how mediation is used to resolve and prevent conflicts in environmental and cultural interest and disputes related to a number of topics, but also healthcare services. The Academy is appreciative of the speaker's time and the sharing of perspectives, contextual understanding, and thoughtful approaches to the very relevant and timely topics. The 10th World Congress truly epitomizes the mission of the Academy, which is to build, through education, worldwide recognition of the power of dispute resolution processes to peacefully resolve conflicts and promote conciliation and healing. This Congress would not have taken place without the leadership of Dr. Migla Jukowska-Tatora, who chaired the organizing committee of this Congress, Professor Dr. Agna Vorochanova, Professor Teresa Frisbee, Professor John Legg, INADR's founder and past president, Dick Calkins, all of whom served on this organizing committee for the World Congress. The moderators for each session, Kara Sawyer, also a law student, Professor Dr. Kaminskova, RAYANA Muscovy, the law student and who you've just already been introduced to, and the Academy's interns, Katerina, Elvira, Federica, and Alex, and members of NLIU Student Mediation Cell, including Tejas, Avipik, Spandana, and many others whose names I have not mentioned. The Academy is also appreciative for the support of Professor Dr. V. Vijayakumar, the Vice Chancellor of the National Law Institute University, and Dr. Neha Sharma, faculty member, NLIU. Again, on behalf of the Academy, its officers and directors, we hope that this final session of the World Congress will be a worthwhile, enjoyable, and a very enriching experience. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for that wonderful introduction. And I think at this point of time, I would also like to invite Professor Dr. V. Vijayakumar to come and say a few words about NLIU Bhopal and his involvement in the World Mediation Congress. Yes, I believe our Vice Chancellor is having some problems with connecting. So I think we could continue with the introductions for now, and then we could just come back to Professor Vijayakumar as soon as he's able to connect with us. John, over to you.
Well, thank you, RAYANA. Switch over. Thank you. Thank you, RAYANA. We'll come back to Dr. Vijay when he comes back on here. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Dennis over this last year, the difficult year that everybody's had through our organization, through his leadership. We reformulate our processes, how we're going to do things. We have done, I think, more this year than and any of us have imagined. And this is really a culmination of a year of resilience and this 3-day event around the world, people from every continent just about in the world here in many countries. So that, without any further ado, what I'd like to do is we'll go to our first speaker today. We have four speakers in our first half of the presentation today. And our first one, I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Kevin Brown. First of all, thank you for being here, Doctor. He is the president of Mediation International and the International Mediators Association. is Ombudsman for the UN Office of the Ombudsman and Mediation Services, Green Climate Fund, and the European Space Agency. And first of all, Kevin Brown, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you tell us where you're located physically here today too also, and you know what, let's do this 1 second. If Dr. Kevin Brown, if you can hold on 1 second, we're going to go back to RAYANA to introduce Dr. V. Are you okay, VJ? Can you, I think he's got, okay, good. RAYANA is going to introduce you. We'll come right back to this, Doctor. Thank you. RAYANA?
Yes, thank you, John. I hope I'm audible, yes. Okay, so I think without further ado, I would like to formally invite Professor Dr. V. Vijay Kumar, who is the Vice Chancellor of the National Law Institute University, to come and say a few words about the university and his involvement thereafter. So if, sir, you could please unmute yourself and switch your camera on, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good evening to everyone present here. John Lag, Kevin Brown, the entire team. The National Law Institute University is the second law university established in this country. And it has been doing exceedingly well in association with INADR. And we keep organizing the program every year, and we have lots of visitors coming in, and it's a very, very popular program in this country. And sometimes, you know, the students also don't get an opportunity to come in because there are certain limits of teams that can participate. I am particularly very happy for the entire team, which considered that NLIU Bhopal is a worthy partner to be partnering in this INADR's World Mediation Congress 2021. It does bring lots of people together. It is an online platform. It is the only thing that we can do right now. And I hope that in the months to come, or possibly early next year, I would like to invite all of you to NLIU. We have certain plans of organizing a mediation postgraduate diploma as well as certificate courses for diverse audiences in the country, lawyers, general public, so on and so forth. Because the new Consumer Protection Act, which gives what you call it as an opportunity for mediated settlement of the consumer disputes, I see lots of potential for such training to be offered. And I would request INADR to continue to extend its support for such programs. And without much ado, I wish that this program goes very well, and hope to see all of you physically at the NLIU campus next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, please, John, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, for those warm comments, thank you. At this point, again, we're going to come back to, again, I'll reintroduce, if you will, Dr. Kevin Brown. He's president of Mediation International Mediators Association. He can fill you in a little more on his other qualifications and what he's been doing, and how he suggests using mediation to cool off a heated planet. Dr. Kevin Brown, welcome. Unmute yourself, please.
That helps, doesn't it? Thank you very much. It is an honor, a real true honor to be here today amongst all the other esteemed guests. I want to thank you, John and RAYANA, for co-hosting, co-moderating this, and for the very kind introduction. I must admit that I find this part of any presentation I make to be the most difficult, because I have to talk about myself. I consider myself to be a humble person, and here I am being asked to brag about myself, talk about my successes, talk about what I've achieved. If you're really interested in learning about me, you can easily go to my website, mediationinternational.eu, and find out more about me. I've been doing this for over 30 years now. I started out as a mediator in Canada. I started with family, got into corporate, criminal, workplace, which is where I have a real passion. I then began doing international mediation. I visited Spain about 10 years ago and ended up moving here, and I'm living in Spain now. And you might be able to just take one quick look at me and tell that I'm not Spanish. No, I am Canadian, as I mentioned. And so I've been here, I've been working with the United Nations as an ombuds for the last 5 years. I've been working with the Green Climate Fund, as well as an international organization based in Korea. And I work with the European Space Agency, all as either an ombuds or a mediator, senior mediator with them. If I might be so bold as to mention that, in my 30 years of ombudsing, I've worked all across the globe and have found that there are very, very similar conflicts in every culture. Conflicts are not restricted to any particular culture by any stretch of the imagination. They go within culture and they go across culture. I'm going to speak to you today about how culture impacts conflicts, and I'll share with you some of my experience as an international ombuds and how the different conflicts have arisen and how culture has played a role in them. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that culture creates conflict. It doesn't by itself. It's when somebody imposes their culture on another, and that's what creates and causes conflict, as does as well misunderstanding another's culture. I don't know how loud it is, the background noise, but something just is outside my window, and I'm not sure. I hope it'll stop very, very soon. And I hope it's not too much of an annoyance to you. In mediation, at least in my experience, people will see things from very different perspectives, and that's why they're in conflict. So I have about 30 minutes or so to talk to you about this. It's not a lot of time at all, so I'm going to have to really speed through a lot of the information. I'll have some slides up. I'm going to speak to you about Hofstede's 6 dimensions of culture and how they relate to conflict. And I'm going to, given time, I will talk to you also about some of the actual conflicts that I've seen and the cultural nuances that have played a role in these cultures. Now, when people come to me as a mediator or ombuds, oftentimes one person will come to me and tell me what happened on that fateful day when a conflict began with them and another person. I do a lot of international, and a lot of that has to do with international workplaces. So I will listen to this person, and they will decide that they'd like to sit down and have a facilitated conversation or a mediation with the other person. They'll authorize me to speak to the other person, and so I'll meet with them privately and talk to them. And they too will tell me the story about what happened on that fateful day with the other person. And I'm listening to the second person, and I'm wondering if the two people were even in the same room when this happened. Their versions are so different. Their perspectives are so different. They are telling me almost two completely different stories. Now, neither one of them is lying. Neither one of them is making anything up. They just see it from a very different perspective. Now, I run a number of courses, and I try to explain this to people, and I often get that, I call it the deer in the headlights look. So when people are looking at you going, what is he talking about? How can two people look at the exact same thing and see something completely different? So I decided a few years ago that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so I want to show you something, my next slide, and ask you what you see. You can tell us what you see by adding it into the chat, but I know it's a little awkward with Zoom, so I'm going to share the slide. And there you have a ballerina, and the ballerina is spinning. Which direction do you think she is spinning is? Is she spinning clockwise or anti-clockwise? Is she spinning around to the left or around to the right? Take a look at it If there are 5 people in this room, I would have at least five different responses. People will tell me that they're spinning to the left, to the right, and then they'll say, no, she's switched, she's going the other way. If there's 150 to 200 to 500 people looking at this one picture, there's going to be that many people seeing something slightly different. Now, I've thought at different times that, you know, there's a trick here and they're somehow manipulating this this dancer to make it look different things, but I ended up looking at her leg and trying to figure out which way she's going, and I still got confused. So basically what this tells me is that we can all look at the exact same thing and see different things. I have a couple of other slides I'll show you in a couple of minutes, and yep. My apologies, the slide didn't switch, I thought it had. Here's the picture of the ballerina, as you can see, hopefully you can see it now. She's spinning, not sure if she's going clockwise, not sure if she's going counterclockwise. I look at her, and for me right now, she is going anti-clockwise. And I'm looking at it, and right now she just switched, she's going in the other direction. So take a look at that, and as I just mentioned when you couldn't see the slide, our perspective on this can change very quickly. She will be going one direction and then the other direction. I do have a couple other slides, time permitting, that I'll show you in a few minutes. So bear with me. I want to be sure that you realize that we're talking about cultural issues. And what makes up cultural issues are quite a few different things. We all see things through our own lens. This lens is our own perspective. Our perspectives, or the lenses that we see things through, is based on so many aspects of our lives: culture, community, religion, gender, age, education, stories that we're taught as children, our beliefs and values, as well as our communities, and so many other things. I'm going to show you another example, a quick example. Now, it's I agree that the next slide is a wee bit silly, but I hope you understand the deeper. You'll be able to understand the deeper meaning when you look at it. So you have two warring factions, two groups of people just about ready to go to war. Both sides have their flags up, and one side says, the caption at the bottom, there can be no peace until they renounce the rabbit god and accept our duck god. So take a look at the flags and tell us what it is that you see. Do you see a duck, or do you see a rabbit? Or can you see both? Look at the flag and look at the picture. Now I'm going to show you another picture of the exact same thing. If you look at this, there is a rabbit that's facing to our right. And you can see where the ears are. It's pointed out where the ears are. Those ears, if you look at it from a different perspective, are not ears any longer, but they are the beak of a duck. The duck is looking to the left. Let me just go back and I'll show you the flags again. Take another look at those flags, and you'll be able to see hopefully you'll be able to see the rabbit and the duck, depending upon the perspective that you look at it. Now, there's a lot of these perspective slides that you've probably seen. Picture of an old woman and a young woman, and just how, depending upon how you look at it, you might be able to see something different. So that's really just my lead in to how our perspective can make a big difference to how we perceive things on a daily basis, and I'll now share with you how culture can play a role in that. So I put up a definition there of what culture is: an interwoven system. Our background has a great deal to do with our perspective. Our culture contributes to our perspectives. Our culture often determines the lens that we see the world from. Culture exists on scales both large and small. The cultures can be something as small as an American culture, Middle Eastern culture, Indian cultures, or more distinct cultures, such as an Amish community in Pennsylvania in the United States. a Basque community in northern Spain or southern France. Different cultures in India and Bangladesh and Pakistan. Each of the different areas or regions have their own culture. Within those regions, there are different cultures. And within those cultures, there are people that either adhere to the culture or don't adhere to it. So one of the huge points I want to stress here is that I'm going to be generalizing when I talk about culture. It'll be based a little bit on stereotypes. Not everybody in a specific culture lives by the culture that one might expect them to live in, simply because they're of that culture. A culture itself is a shared system of symbols and beliefs and values and attitudes, expectations, norms of behavior. Simply put, culture is the integration of what a person does, what they wear, what they eat, the beliefs, and so on. Cultural background influences the way a person prioritizes what is important in their life, helps define their attitude towards what is appropriate and what is basically established as the rules of behavior. Now, I think all of us have seen at some point or another an iceberg and how an iceberg is used to define something particular. I've seen conflict icebergs, and this here is a cultural iceberg. You see the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg are the explicit aspects of a person's culture. It's what you're able to see when you first look at a person. Their behaviors, their traditions. Underneath that though, are the implicit aspects of their culture. So, as I mentioned, the central point here is to show that we generally only see the tip of the iceberg. The greatest part is below the surface. The Titanic, the movie The Titanic was a great example of that. Now, this whole idea of that iceberg applies to cultures as we see it is not necessarily the person in front of us. People with prejudices will only see the color of a person's skin, the clothes that that person wears, the manner in which they act, and come to a conclusion based on these simple observations without ever truly knowing the depth of the person that's standing right in front of them. This particular iceberg shows that only 10% of a person's culture is above the surface, and their core values lie below the surface. Up above the waterline are the explicit aspects, those items that are observable. Let me give you Spain as an example. If you think about Spain, what do you think about? Most people think about flamenco, guitars, bullfighting, paella, the food that they serve, beaches, beautiful beaches to go and enjoy. Catholicism, 94% of Spain is Catholic. Gaudi, famous, some of the best wines and olives in the world, and much more. And I have a mosquito that's going around, I apologize. Underneath the waterline, though, are the implicit aspects of in Spain or anywhere else in any other culture. Some of the things that people don't know about Spanish people are that, one example is we call it the sobremesa. What that means is around the table. On Sundays, pre-COVID, people would gather around the table on Sundays. Family would, from 5 to 15 people, I guess, sitting around the table, spending a few hours eating and drinking and talking and sharing. And the children, the grandparents, all generations would be there. And they would be talking about everything, except there's some things that they just wouldn't talk about. Unwritten rules. If there were people that had different opinions, they would not talk about politics. If there were people of different religions, they would not talk about religion. If there were people, I'm in Madrid, if there were people that did not agree with me that Real Madrid was the best football team in the world, and they thought maybe Barcelona was, we would not talk about that because those were considered taboo subjects. Because within the Spanish culture, people just don't have those conversations. Very different from my culture in Canada when these were the basis of our conversations. We spoke about all sorts of aspects, and we enjoyed the lively debates. All depends on your culture, what is acceptable and what is not. So I'm going to jump in to talk about the cross-cultural issues that Geert Hofstede came up with. He came up with these dimensions way back, I think as early as the 70s, maybe it was the 80s. He started out with 4 dimensions, and then it grew to 5 dimensions, and currently it's at 6 dimensions. This rationale has been around for a long time, but it's never been rebuffed. I've not heard anything or anyone either. I guess maybe it's been challenged, but nobody has shown that there's anything much greater out there. There are 10 stages that Keith, I think his name is. I'll get to him in a little bit. But these are the foundation of when we look at culture and the impact that cultures have. Nobody is supposed to be or is expected to be an expert in all cultures. I can't imagine anybody being that. I've been doing cultural work for 30 years now, and I don't consider myself an expert on all cultures. I find myself knowledgeable on a lot of the cultures, but that certainly doesn't make me all knowledgeable about every culture that's out there, because there's so many, and there's so many aspects and variables that play a role in the different cultures. Geert Hofstede came up with this, as I said, some time ago. Take a look at the first one. They talk about high or low power distance. And depending upon what culture you're in will help you to understand how people look at high and low power distances. For instance, if you're in a high power distance culture, the boss the boss is always right. If you're the boss, you're the top of the chain, you are right, and you're expected to be right, and you are assumed to be right at all times, because that's how the hierarchy works. A low power balance is the opposite. These cultures will contemplate people valuing equalization of the power and competency over seniority. A huge difference between the two when you're working together in international groups. Imagine a high power and a low power distance people working together and trying to make a decision. Is it a group decision, or is one person make the final decision? The second dimension is risk-taking. It's very important to know whether or not the people that you're working with are risk takers, because risk takers are risk avoiders are averse to risk, and they're averse to ambiguous situation. They prefer safe behavior and conformity. Risk takers, on the other side, are more open to new ideas and problem solving. The third dimension is individualism or collectivism. Now, does the culture emphasize individualism or collectivism? Individualistic cultures, people from there value individualistic needs and independence over the community's needs. On the other side, the collectivist culture, there's a high recognition of individuals' interdependence and the importance of cooperation and the overriding need of the group. In Thailand, as an example, most people there are collectivists. And let me give you an example. I did my master's program. Part of it was a 5-week residency in Thailand. One of the most amazing 5 weeks I've ever had. But just like any university, there was a group work that you did, and people were working together. One example was on the first day, the professor held up the text and said, "Who's bought this and who needs it? We can have it for you tomorrow, and the cost is whatever it was." So all of us, or most of the people from the West, put their hand up. They needed a book. So there's 10 people need the book. And the Thai people all turned to each other, said something in Thai, and one person turned around and said, "We need one book." So they got one book. We got our 10. We each paid for them. The very next morning, the Thais all had their own version of the book. They just went out and had it printed up. It's a collectivist society. Everybody owns everything. When we were doing group work, they would use the words of other authors without documenting. They would be plagiarizing all the time because that's the norm. They don't see anything wrong with that. We had to come to some sort of conclusion because in my world, people that plagiarize get kicked out of university. So we had to figure out a way of resolving this amicably, and we did. The fourth dimension is masculine versus feminine culture. Now, obviously, this one relates to gender. Is the culture more masculine in that it values assertiveness, competitiveness, independence? Or is the culture more feminine and values nurturing, cooperation, and relationships? Now, again, I know a lot of women that are assertive, competitive, and independent. And I know a lot of women who do not consider themselves to be nurturing, cooperative, or having a larger focus on relationships than on contracts, say, for example. Just because you're of one gender, just because you're of one culture, doesn't mean that you conform to all of the different standards within that culture. I don't think I can say that enough times. I don't want people walking away from here thinking that all Canadians are this, all Spaniards are this, because that's not the purpose here. And if you do start looking at that, you'll be making a lot of very huge mistakes. The fifth dimension of culture that Hofstede came up with was long-term, or LTO. A long-term orientation tends to be pragmatic, modest, more thrifty. Short-term oriented countries, people tend to place more emphasis on principles, consistency, truth, and are typically religious and nationalistic. A perfect example of this is the United States. The US has a short-term orientation, generally speaking. This is reflected in the importance of short-term gains, quick results. Profit and loss statements are generally quarterly as opposed to annually, as a simple example. It's also reflected in the country's strong sense of nationalism and social standards. Almost everyone, not everyone, but almost everyone has a flag in their home. Many of them have the flags outside their home, displaying their patriotism, their nationalism. The Second Amendment, to own weapons, for example, is another example of a long-term orientation. The final dimension is indulgence versus restraint. Now, a high indulgence community encourages free gratification of people's own drives and emotions, such as enjoying life and having fun, high level of importance. In a society with a low indulgence score, there's more emphasis on suppressing gratification and more regulation of people's conduct and behavior. There's stricter social norms. All of these dimensions really can play a significant role in the negotiation or mediation process. In a mediation in particular, it's beneficial for the mediator to keep in mind the 6 dimensions and watch to see where each party might be standing. Don't make the assumption that because somebody is from India, that they follow these sets of rules, or they're from Pakistan, or they're from Malaysia, or they're from wherever. Just because a person, as I've tried to stress here, comes or looks like they come from a certain culture, or they look like they belong to a certain culture, doesn't mean that they do. We have to make sure that we don't fall into that trap, as it's an easy trap to fall into. I don't have time to go through the next couple of steps. There's 10 factors that really show. These 10 factors are put out by, I'm trying to think of his name, Jeswald Salacuse. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Salacuse. He has a book out called Making Global Deals, 10 Factors Where Culture Could Impede a Deal. Check that out. It's very straightforward. It talks about negotiation goals and attitudes. Is it a win-lose versus a win-win? So is it competitive or collaborative? Is it informal or formal? Do people roll up their sleeves and just get down to work? Do they start off with first names, or do they wait until to show respect? Is it disrespectful to call somebody by their first name? Is it direct communication or indirect? As I'm sure many of you know, there are cultures that just don't say no. They will say everything around it, but they will not say the word no. And you have to really, if you're not from that culture, you really have to get used to that and adjust. Time, that's a huge aspect. You know, when I was brought up in Canada, the rule was if you show up for a meeting on time, you're 5 minutes late. Here in Spain, if you show up for a meeting on time, you are the only person there. Everybody shows up 15 minutes later. That's just the norm, part of the culture, how people see and how much respect or how important time is. If you are in a culture where they expect you to be on time and you show up 15 minutes later, that can really hinder the any negotiations afterwards, because the first group of people may be feeling very, very disrespected. Emotionalism, is it a highly emotional area? Do people express their emotions? The US, Germany, different countries, Italy, Spain can be very emotional. Japan, on the other side, will hide their emotions, not show their emotions in public, as it's inappropriate for them. Team building an agreement, you go from bottom up or top down. Team organization, is there one leader or is it group consensus? If it's one leader and you're trying to build consensus, you might be wasting your time in that area. And the risk taking, I already mentioned that. So what happens when different cultures mix? Let me give you an example, a real world example, one that I experienced. I was called to England. They asked me to help out a group of 12 people that had been working together for about 6 months or so, and then everything broke down. There was two groups though. One was from England and the other was from the United States. There's 6 people on each side. Something happened and nobody was talking to the head office and nobody was talking to each other. The work wasn't getting done. The groups refused to work with each other. They were calling each other liars and all sorts of different names. It had just escalated into an ugly situation. So they asked me if I could help, see if I could go out there and help to resolve this, help them to resolve their conflict. So I went there. I met with them as a group, and then we broke into 2 separate groups, and I met with one of the groups first. And we sat there for a couple of hours, I guess, talking about what was going on. You know, they told me that they'd been working together for, I think, a year at the time. But for the last 6 months, it's just been awful. Murder working with these people. We don't want to work with them. They're liars. We can't trust them. That's what I was told. So I tried to get examples. I was digging. I was probing. I was asking, you know, some questions that made them have to think about it, not just give me yes and no answers. Finally, somebody said, we just can't trust them. We don't trust them at all. They're not trustworthy. I said, okay, so give me an example. Dead silence. I love silence myself. So I waited and I waited. Finally I said, okay, here's a typical example. We sat there, we're talking about doing such and such a thing, and we agreed to take it off the table. They agreed, we agreed. So we met the next day. Guess what? All they wanted to do was talk about it. They wouldn't take it off the table. It drove us crazy. No matter what we said, they just did the exact opposite. They were obviously intentionally trying to infuriate us. I was a little confused with this. But I said, okay, all right. Met with the other group. Same thing. We don't trust them. They're not trustworthy. Went through the same process. Asked them questions. Tell me. So started digging as well. And they gave me the same example. They said, sure, why don't we use that? Here's an example, perfect example. This has been happening for the last 6 months. We agree to take it off the table. And all they want, and they don't want to talk about it anymore. They're not talking about it anymore. They're just not dealing with it. We don't get it. We don't understand what they're doing. Okay, so I think many of you are probably figuring out where this is going. One of the groups understood take it off the table to mean put it away and don't deal with it. The other group understood take it off the table to mean deal with it so that we can take it off the table. Cultural difference in a simple phrase. I brought the groups together and I asked them, so somebody tell, both of you have given me the example of taking something off the table. Will somebody tell me what does take it off the table mean? And one group said, well, it's pretty straightforward. When you take something off the table, you put it aside and you no longer deal with it. The other group goes, what are you talking about? That's not what it means. Quite honestly, it was probably the simplest mediation I have ever done. As soon as they realized that, they actually started laughing at each other. They looked at their own group. A couple of them were actually crying. They were laughing so hard. And there was apologies, and they went back to where they were a few months ago, all because of a simple cultural difference that people just missed on. They just missed the idea, and they weren't, for whatever reason, willing to talk about it with each other until they had a third party come in and help them work through that and bring it to light. So when cultures mix, you're going to have difficulties. When cultures see things from a different perspective, you're going to have them have the potential for there to be conflict. Culture unto itself does not create conflicts, just like poverty does not create conflicts. It's when one person has more money than the other person, that's when there's a conflict. Culture doesn't create conflicts. It's when somebody starts to impose their culture on the other person that conflicts start, or when somebody doesn't understand the other person's culture and where they're coming from and their belief system and their values. When these things are up in the air and there's confusion, and hey, we're not all living in a small town someplace where everybody is the same. We're living and working in a global community, and because of cultural issues, we have conflicts. I think my time is up. I might be over my time. I'm not exactly sure. I know we're supposed to start at 10 after, and I started a little bit late. Yes, my time is up.
Yes, Dr. Brown, very good too. We're going to have some questions and answers. Did you have any real quick closing to wrap up, and then we'll have some discussion here, some of the questions?
No, I think I'm good. I'm ready to move on to any questions that might be there.
Okay. Very good, very insightful. I mean, for 30 minutes, you're picking a whole lot, which is good, but very effective. Thank you so much. RAYANA, you had a couple questions I noticed from the feed there, I believe, right? How can perspectives of individual, go ahead, you can read it, RAYANA.
Yes, John. So I believe the first question that we had coming in was with respect to the multi-layered cultural approach. And I think you said at the very outset that in countries such as India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, you have a lot of subcultures involved. And many people may not necessarily be living by that culture. So I think the question that was posed is, when you are trying to negotiate or mediate with a culture like one that exists in Bangladesh or India, and you may not be very familiar with such a culture, how do you make that assumption in the absence of stereotypes? How do you only rely on stereotypes, or would you not know if someone follows a very specific subculture? So how do you manage an expectation that is so vast?
Excellent question. Using Bangladesh as an example is great. I've done a lot of work in Bangladesh. I've worked with BIMS, the Bangladesh International Mediation Society, quite a bit over the last few years. When I'm doing a mediation, one of the aspects of my mediations is I do private caucusing before the mediation. Many of my colleagues do the same. Some don't, many do. In those private mediations or those private caucuses, I ask the questions. I don't want to bring issues of culture, values, beliefs, fears, for example, up in a large group when somebody might be embarrassed or humiliated by it. I will ask those types of questions privately, one-on-one. I will say, so, tell me how your values may have played a role in this. What do you think the other person's perspective might be on this issue? What attitudes do you think the other person might have towards this? So I am not making assumptions. I am checking my assumptions. I believe very strongly in checking our assumptions. I believe very strongly in self-assessment, self-awareness. None of us are completely self-aware what do they say? That you're three people: who you think you are, who the other person thinks you are, and whoever you really are, somewhere in the middle. But if we are self-reflective and self-aware, and we check our assumptions daily, because we make assumptions so hundreds of times on a daily basis, then we're going to be in a much clearer, we'll have a much clearer way of, or better chance, I guess, of being able to identify, what may be our biases, what may be our even prejudices, but at least what may be our assumptions. So ask the questions. If you hear something saying, so how does that affect you? Do the two of you see things from the same perspective? Are you from different cultures? Thank you.
I think that's a very interesting perspective. John, do you want to take the next question, or should I just carry on from here?
Go ahead, you've got it. Go ahead, Rayana. Thank you.
All right, John. So I think the next question that was posed is, how can perspectives of individuals affected by cultural stigmas be changed using mediation as a tool for convincing?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Yes. It's how can perspectives of individuals affected by cultural stigmas be changed using mediation as a tool for convincing?
Really good question. And it's a very similar answer. There are stereotypes, and there's a reason for stereotypes in most cases, because this is what people have done in certain cultures for a long time. Many people in certain cultures have done this. In Spain, many people do flamenco, many people eat paella, many people go to the bullfights. In my Spanish family, nobody does flamenco, nobody goes to the bullfights, but everybody eats paella. We can't jump in and just believe whatever the stereotypes are. Again, I hate to repeat myself, but talk to the people, ask the questions, find out, what's going on. Being curious is what it's all about. You can go to the internet and find out a ton of information on cultures. There are actually websites where, if you want to, I did some work for a company here in Spain. They have 40,000 employees going around the world. And before they went, they wanted to teach those people about the culture they were going to move into. So I managed to find this really good website that will tell you about Italy, about Canada, about India, about you name it. And they've done a lot of research, and that will give you some insights. It's not all guaranteed, like I say, but it gives you a little bit more insights.
All right, I think that's a very interesting approach to take, although slightly concerning to hear that maybe cultural perspectives and stereotypes can't always be changed. However, I think it's best we move to the next question, which is...
I'm sorry, Rayana. Let me just double check on something. Did you hear me say that stigma or cultures or beliefs in other cultures or stereotypes, your beliefs cannot be changed?
No, what I understood was that it's slightly harder. Okay. And it's just easier to just have that conversation with people sometimes instead of trying to understand that culture from a third-party perspective.
Absolutely. And the way we change our belief system is by talking to people and by hearing them. Yes, perfect. Okay. Thanks. I just didn't want to be misunderstood.
Yes. I'm sorry if I phrased it in the wrong way.
No, it's good.
So the next question we have is, how significant are the dimensions in a process of dispute resolution, and what are the practical problems that one may encounter from the perspective of cultural dimensions? Yeah.
By and large, by themselves, they're not a problem. It's only when, as I've mentioned, when one group is following their culture and the other person doesn't understand it and can't figure out why they're taking so many risks when they're not a risk taker, or why are they deferring to the group? Shouldn't the boss be making this decision? I remember one person, an intern at the UN, quitting his job because on his first or second day, they were at a team meeting and they were there, and the boss was asked a question and said, and then the boss said, I think this makes sense. And then three people said, no, I don't think we should do it that way. I think we should try this. Well, why don't we try this? And the new person sat there and went, how can they disrespect their boss so much? The boss is the ultimate authority. They should just let him win and sit back and do. The person just didn't understand the culture of team decision making.
I think another thing I want to ask is what really will be the problem if you maybe start a mediation or a negotiation with a fight over whether Real Madrid is better than Barcelona?
Well, that's an easy one. Whoever says Barcelona is better is wrong. That's just really clearly evident to me. No, as I mentioned, I'm from Canada, and hockey is our game. It's not so much European football; it's hockey. And I was a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. By the way, the last time they won was in 1957. So I'm a diehard. Okay, I'm not exaggerating either. They get really close, and then they just die every year. And I have friends that are Ottawa fans, others that are Montreal Canadiens fans, and we all sit there and watch the game together, and we love it because we compete, we're friends, we have a great time. My cousins in Scotland, if one's a Rangers fan and the other's a Celtic fan, they do not sit in the same room and watch the game. They can't. They are best of friends outside, but they will hurt each other during a football game because of their beliefs. So some beliefs are so ingrained, they're part of our identity. My mom is a devout Catholic. She is 89 years old. She realizes that she's getting to the end, and she's becoming an even more devout Catholic. Try to change her mind. Try to change her mind. That's not going to happen. It just doesn't happen. There are some things that people's values, why, and their identity, why would you try to change somebody's mind on that unless it's creating a problem for somebody else within like a workplace or what have you?
All right, I think that's all the time we have for question and answers. Thank you so much, Kevin. I think this was an incredible session, and I think we learned a lot about how mediation would work or negotiation would work in a cross-cultural setting. I think we can move on then, Kevin, unless you have anything to say in concluding.
No, I don't have anything. RAYANA, it's great to see you again. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you guys for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the presentations. I don't know how long I can stay, but I'll certainly check them out on YouTube.
All right, thank you so much for being here, Kevin.
Okay, thank you too, John. Bye for now.
All right, I think with that, we can move on to our next speaker today, who is Mark Holstein. Today, Mark will be speaking on oil spill disasters, negotiating a settlement with a large group of claimants. Mark, while I'm not going to go into the full introduction, I'm going to let Mark come and have a full discussion on who he is and where he's tuning in from. But currently, Mark is the General Counsel at Citgo Petroleum Corporation. So without further ado, Mark, if you could just unmute yourself and switch your camera on.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Mark, we can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be back here with this group. I was involved with this group from the very beginning, and actually was one of the initial board members, so it's really fun to be back here and see some familiar faces as well as some new friends. So really appreciate that. The least interesting thing I would talk about this morning is who I am, but as was said, I'm currently the General Counsel at Citgo Petroleum. But what's relevant to this conversation today is that I served at BP for 26 years in a variety of roles, and was at BP when the Deepwater Horizon disaster occurred in April of 2010, and became involved immediately with the aftermath of that. And that's what I'm going to talk about today in the context of mediation. And is mediation a tool for addressing what was, in fact, one of the largest environmental disasters in the history of the United States, and in some ways in the history of the world. Just a real bit of background on Deepwater Horizon for those on the call today who don't recall. Deepwater Horizon was an extremely sophisticated semi-submersible offshore drilling rig. One of the most sophisticated in the world. It was owned by a company called Transocean, and it was leased by BP for about 12 years. In April of 2010, it was anchored off the shore of Louisiana, about 60 miles offshore, getting ready to disconnect from an exploratory well in a prospect called Macondo. And in the process of that disconnection process, it suffered a blowout and then a catastrophic fire and explosion. The fire could actually be seen for 40 miles. Sadly, 11 of the crew on the Deepwater Horizon were killed at the time of the fire and explosion. And quite miraculously, the rest of the 400 people on board were rescued successfully. So obviously tragic that 11 perished, but testament to preparation and the talent of the crew that everyone else got off. After 2 days, the Horizon sank to the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. And then when that happened, it severed the drill pipe. And for the next 60 plus days, the drill pipe was flowing oil into the Gulf of Mexico. That oil ultimately reached the shore of Alabama and Mississippi, and without question caused some significant environmental damage. If you don't know, in the United States, there's a statutory regime called the Oil Pollution Act. And one of the things the Oil Pollution Act does is establishes a requirement that responsible parties provide an opportunity for a claims process. In other words, those that are being damaged by the environmental incident need to have an opportunity to submit their claims. And that was my involvement with Deepwater Horizon. About the third day in, I started to set up a claims process, which ultimately became the largest private claims facility in the history of the United States. I don't know the exact number, but something like 400 million people and entities submitted claims to the Deepwater and as a result of Deepwater Horizon. Just stop and think about that for a minute, 400 million claims. So the history of the claims process was we set it up at the height of it. We had about 8,000 people working on the claims process, trying to compensate people who had been damaged by the spill. And if you stop to think about that, with a spill of that size and magnitude, the types of claims that we got were never ending. It started, of course, with fishermen and people who harvested the Gulf of Mexico, because the government immediately shut down the Gulf of Mexico for purposes of fishing and harvesting. And then it went on to every type of business along the Gulf Coast, from tourist businesses to restaurants, to people who rented out jet skis, to hotels, to resorts. It was an endless list of potential claimants. So in the summer of 2010, we agreed with the President of the United States, at that time, Barack Obama, that it probably wasn't appropriate to have BP deciding who was going to get money. And so as part of that agreement with the White House, we retained a very famous mediator by the name of Kenneth Feinberg. And Mr. Feinberg took over the handling of claims. He always liked to cite this statistic. Yeah, if you know Mr. Feinberg, you know that he was responsible for the 9/11 compensation fund. And he used to say that he would get more claims in one day working on Horizon than he got from the entirety of the 9/11 compensation fund. So that gives you a sense of the scope and magnitude of what BP was facing in addressing this. Mr. Feinberg ran the claims facility successfully for about 2 years, but BP recognized that it was not sustainable to continue to pay claims on an individual basis. There was no end in sight. And while BP was at the time one of the largest companies in the world, even they have financial limits. And trying to find the right balance between providing appropriate compensation and having the company essentially go bankrupt was the decision that had to be made. And so I want to read to you a quote from the Financial Times that was in an article in the summer of July of 2010 that sort of sets the stage for the rest of my comments. They said, at some point, the scale of this litigation becomes so large that it really is novel. And the situation is likely to be complicated further because of the variety of probable cases, meaning that it would be hard to aggregate them in any form, including so-called class actions. And there was no way to put this in historical context because we've never faced anything like this before. So that was our challenge. How do you bring an end to this? What legal tools, what other tools were available to us to figure out how to bring an end to this without causing one of the largest companies in the world to fail? And ultimately, the decision was that we would see if we could use class action tools available to us in the federal courts of the United States to try to bring our arms around this. And the quote from Financial Times is exactly right. If you know anything about class action law, the very idea of class action law is that you bring together similar claims. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we had claims from every sector, huge variety of claims, economic loss claims, government claims, claims by individuals who asserted they were injured. The list was quite literally as broad as your imagination can contemplate. So we put together a team and started to negotiate to see if there was an opportunity to use class action rules to put our arms around what was left. And what that led to was a lengthy negotiation over the course of 11 months. You might imagine that there's no practical way to negotiate with millions of claimants. Can't be done. So the court appointed what was ultimately referred to as the Plaintiff Steering Committee, and it was some of the most powerful class action and tort lawyers in the United States, led by Joseph Rice from the Rice Motley law firm, quite a famous plaintiffs firm in the United States. They had a team of about 15 negotiators. On the BP side, we built a team of about 90 people. We used to refer to ourselves as traveling gypsies because for the first 6 months or so of the negotiation, we didn't want the press to know the negotiations were going on. And so as a result, we traveled around the country. The case was in New Orleans, so we specifically didn't negotiate in New Orleans, and started to see if there was a way to build a structure that honored United States class action law, but could find a way to bring this to an end. The end result, and then I'll talk a little bit about how mediation played a role, but the end result was 2 class action settlements. One was called the Economic Loss Class Action Settlement, and I believe that website is still up. It's a 1,200-page settlement agreement, which ultimately resulted in a court order approving the settlement, but you can find it online. And it had structures for every type of claim that we could come up with. Then there was a similar personal injury class action settlement. That was roughly 400 pages. And again, incredible complexity. I would say it's fair to say that these settlements pushed the class action regime to its limits in terms of what's achievable under the law. But ultimately, we presented the class action settlements to a federal court in Louisiana, and they were approved. And ultimately, they became the structure for starting the process of bringing Deepwater Horizon to an end. Now, what you're interested in is how does mediation fit into all of this? And the answer is it was part of our toolbox. I mentioned that we had a negotiating team of about 90 people on our side. Then we retained 2 very talented mediators from Louisiana, John Perry and Dan Balhoff. And in addition to that, the federal magistrate judge that was responsible for the MDL also served as a mediator of sorts. And if you can imagine the process, we would have at any given time 10, 15, 20 separate negotiations going on various subjects. So in one room, we might have a representative from the oyster industry, and we would have economists, and we would have scientists, and we would have the right expertise in that room. And that room would be negotiating a compensation structure for how you determine whether an oyster fisherman's been damaged and what he or she should be paid. In another room, we might have a group of hoteliers represented by a different lawyer, different experts, different economists, and all trying to build out a structure that would allow those folks to be compensated. And in a third room, we might have Gulf fishermen of a different type, or tourist businesses, or again, as I say, it's quite a broad area of claimants. And these negotiations went on for months and months. And the mediators would get involved in trying to bridge gaps, and then in the process to help document what was agreed by the parties. Because as you might imagine, you're not going to write a 1,200-page settlement agreement all at one time. This was literally a lengthy, complex process. I have no doubt that having effective mediators involved in the process allowed us to get it done. because in almost every instance, in every section of the agreement, there would be impasses, there would be disagreements, and the mediation process was an important part of our toolbox in getting all of this done. You know, I think what are the lessons learned that I would suggest to this group? And I think they apply whether you're talking about a mediation that was the scale and scope of Horizon, or whether you're talking about a simple mediation between two aggrieved parties who are trying to find an answer. I think getting the right mediator is a critical part of the process. I think with respect to, you know, some really wonderful mediators that I know, getting involved in something as big and as overwhelming as this process was required a real special set of skills, and someone who'd been, you know, had been through the mill on big complex cases before. This wasn't a place for someone to cut their teeth as a mediator. So finding the right mediator, I would say, is job one. Being prepared, making sure that when you, as the party, you approach a mediation, that you've done the work and you know the detail of what you're trying to accomplish, and you can be prepared to address those issues with your mediator. Number three, having the right people in the room. I think for us, a significant part of this was having the right experts who could really contribute. You know, we had a Nobel Prize winning economist who could help us to calculate the impacts of various moves that we were making, and understand, given the complexity of what was going on, really being able to have the right people in the room. Being flexible. You know, you can't, you know, the old joke is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, how do you solve a problem like this? One issue at a time. And recognizing that, you know, over the course of 11 or 12 months, we had to take it in small, achievable segments. And then, you know, recognizing and being creative about what the law allows and what you can accomplish within the structure of the law. I think we made law with Deepwater Horizon in terms of how you use a class action tool. But ultimately, I think it allowed us to largely put this situation behind us. So that's, you know, in substance, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here because I want to be sure we allow for time for questions. But that's really what I wanted to share in terms of some general oversights regarding Deepwater Horizon and how mediation played a role. But I'd be pleased to answer any questions or explore anything anybody wants to dig into.
Thank you, Mark. Very informative, and I must say you've successfully whittled down an incredibly complex event and post-event, if you will, in a few short minutes. There, you can go on for hours and hours. So thank you.
Good. Yeah.
A couple of things. Again, mediation obviously it's all about creative solutions. Here, I think you're saying that the results were not as creative, but the methodology was certainly creative because it had never been done before in this type of scale. How did you, again, what corporate America traditionally is sort of color within the box, if you will, not outside the lines. Yeah. How did you influence being creative here as opposed to keeping everything and here's what the law provides, we're going to file motions, deny liability, the usual delay. How did you change that culture, the corporate culture, or influence that culture to let's get this done and make the best out of a bad situation?
So I certainly can't take credit for that. I mean, we had a very talented, maybe a little, we had a very talented creative management team at BP who recognized, you know, look, this was of a scale and scope that it was a license to operate issue. I mean, you know, some of you may recall that in the summer of 2010, the president said that he had his foot on the neck of BP. It was, you know, when they talk about companies being too big to fail, I'm telling you that there's no such thing. And so to some extent, you know, just fighting and litigating, I think there's a recognition by the BP management team and by the legal team that that probably wasn't a sustainable approach. And, you know, as I say, we had a very talented management team who took counsel and recognized that this was not going to be a paint by the numbers situation. You know, as the Financial Times article suggested, we've never seen anything like this. One of my colleagues used to say, you guys are building a roller coaster, or you're riding a roller coaster rather, and building it as you're riding the tracks. And there was some truth to that. But we had to find, you know, the creativity was really about finding a way to bring it to an end, because to allow it to go in the normal legal course, you know, with endless litigation, fighting claims, no company could sustain that. And we recognized that pretty quickly. Now, having said all that, what I haven't talked about today, because we just don't have time, is once the settlement agreements were reached, the abuses in Louisiana, which I'll, with all apologies to any colleagues here from Louisiana, is not a really easy place to be a corporate defendant. And the level of abuse, you know, even I, as a very experienced litigator at that point, I've never seen anything like it. And so there was a whole third phase here where we were litigating, and at one point, actually, BP asked the Supreme Court to dismantle the settlements because we thought it was hopeless, but that's another topic for another day. All of it required thinking out of the box.
Thank you. One of the questions came up on the feed here is like, how are environmental claims handled with it, where there's a potentially irreparable environmental harm? How do you quantify, or how do you come up with it's not just here's X dollars? What happened there?
Yeah, so on the environmental side, that was an entirely different work stream. I mean, those were not negotiated as part of these mediations. And we had extensive negotiations through the course of many years with the Environmental Protection Agency and the local environmental protection agencies in the states. And ultimately, they were resolved by settlement and extensive. I mean, it's public record that the Deepwater Horizon event cost BP over $60 billion. And you could probably count on one hand the number of companies in the world who could withstand that sort of attack. But that's how they were resolved. They were resolved by massive settlements with various environmental protection agencies. And even today, I see news reports about, you know, local governments, federal governments using some of the BP money for various projects. So, you know, to the extent there's a silver lining, obviously nobody wants to see an event like this, but there are a lot of projects that have been funded with Deepwater Horizon money that had nothing to do with Deepwater Horizon.
And are there remediation projects, if you will, continuing to this day? Is something other than financial money paid out, is a bigger good, a bigger result to come from
great
this?
question. Yeah, so on two fronts, there was remediation done as a direct result of Deepwater Horizon. And I will tell you, if you're going to have a spill and you don't want to have one, the Gulf of Mexico is a pretty good place to have one. And I don't say that flippantly. First of all, the Gulf of Mexico regularly has oil seeping from the subsurface into the Gulf on a daily basis. It's a natural part of the process. So as a result, the Gulf, its ecosystem is designed to deal with oil. And so that, combined with the temperature of the water, the location of the spill, and the viscosity of the oil that was spilled, made remediation easier than, for example, in Alaska when Valdez happened. Now, there were beaches that were oiled. There were areas that were directly impacted. And, you know, they have been remediated. And I think some would say the Gulf is in better shape than it ever has been. To the second part of your question, yes, a lot of the settlement money with the environmental agencies was used for lots of other projects. And, you know, I could list them off, but there were many projects that were funded with BP settlement money. So I think, as I said earlier, that's one of the silver linings here.
Thank you, Mark. One question too, I'm going to paraphrase, if you will. How did you balance, if you will, interest, private interest, the people, lobster fishermen or shrimp fishermen, others, with government interests? For one, environmental, the money to remediate, and the reputation of politicians, if you will, the government. They had a lot at stake, a lot of blame, right? It's not my fault. I'm sure it came up a lot. How'd you balance community interest, I want money, and public interest?
Very challenging. It's very challenging. And, you know, it gets easier the farther out you get from the event because, frankly and bluntly, politicians lose interest and move on to the next topic du jour. In 2010 and early 2011, it was very difficult. You know, for example, in an average year, a company like BP might participate in 1 or 2 congressional hearings. In 2010, we did over 50. And that doesn't count the state hearings that we participated in. So you're right, you know, politicians have interests that may diverge from private interests. And, you know, you don't have the luxury when when the press is showing every day video of your well flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, you really don't have the privilege and luxury of separating them. You have to deal with both. So it's very challenging. You know, I think what most companies learn from Verizon is that you really have to be prepared to address something like this because it's very challenging to catch up once it happens.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you another question. Those are the softball questions. Here, I'm going to ask you a good one here. A baseball euphemism here. BP, the resolution claims it's over, done now, is passed. I think everybody would consider it a unique and successful, making the best of a bad situation, if you will. So a way to do it, creative, it kind of blazed the path. Now there was about 36 years ago, since we are based out of Bhopal here today, Union Carbide, largest industrial accident in the world at the time, I think it was. That's still an open wound. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And it seems like that's a lot of unresolved issues. Your event and the post-event, if you will, maybe not everybody was happy, but people have been able to move on, move forward, not just get over it, but move past the event. To me, in my experience, and I was at the site in Union Carbide a year ago, it seems like it's an open wound. It's still that unresolved, good son of a gun, all those issues, and there's physical and mental issues. How does that, why did that not work compared to this? What types of things, again, cooling off a heated planet, how do we use mediation to proactively resolve issues that might still be out there?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, and I think it's a complicated one because
Clearly.
there are aspects of what you just said that are right, but there are also aspects of it that may not be right. I mean, for example, BP today is about half the size that it was when Deepwater Horizon happened, and the impact on employees and their families, the communities in which they do business. I don't think we fully understand all of that yet. And not that I'm expecting anybody here to feel sorry for BP, I'm not. But I think in looking at the overall impact on society, one could make an argument that BP should have dug in and litigated, because ultimately the abuses of, a settlement that was an attempt to do as you described, to move on, put it behind, had some very deep impacts on what was from my perspective, having worked there 26 years, a good company. And so I think that chapter hasn't been written yet. I think, there are corporate ethics questions that play a role. There are profitability questions. There's the impact on society. And I think we'll be studying these events for years. I have a bias toward resolving disputes outside the courts. They don't, but in the BP case, it was the judicial system and the class action structure that allowed it in the first place. And as I say, I think the B schools are going to be looking at that for years and evaluating whether, from a shareholder perspective, it was the right thing to do. And that's just one lens, obviously. But when you are the board of a big company, that is your lens, and boards will be thinking about that.
It appears that there was a structure, at least, for bringing the parties together to force to resolve this one way or the other lawsuits.
That's
I think
true.
Perhaps in the Bhopal instance, from what I've studied on the issue,
Yes.
There really wasn't a ready-made forum for it, which I think at this day and age in India, I believe there is, and international law has developed. And perhaps
I
agree
agree.
because of the BP spill.
I agree, and I have a bias toward that. But then the rest of it has to be there too. You can have a structure, but if you don't have appropriate judicial protection, so that the company is going to get the result it bargained for, other companies are going to say, well, maybe not.
Okay. One last thing too, what I, if you will, use it when I teach mediation is that intellect over emotion, but don't forget your heart. You're a human being, you come from somewhere. Big corporate America is, you know, cold-hearted, bottom line, okay, you didn't do that, fight it, take it to the mattresses, if they say. In those corporate meetings, and there are plenty of them, what do we do on this? Intellect, okay, forget emotion here. Where was the heart? Was there a corporate heart? Were there people that, oh my God, people were really affected? I'm assuming the answer is yes here. But I mean, how did that affect it? The humanity, how did it creep in?
Without doubt. I mean, you know, that I think it's one of the reasons that BP chose the path that it went down. You know, it was very much committed to doing the right thing. And that sounds very cliched, but you know, that has to be your North Star when you're working on something like this. And it was certainly the North Star of the people on my team who were in the trenches doing the negotiation. You know, the intent here was to do the right thing. And look, we have to be real about it as litigators. We know there are lots of people out in the world who are interested in doing the right thing. And I could spend days telling you about fraudulent claims that we saw and disingenuous claims that we saw. And, you know, so it would be very easy when you're working through an event like Deepwater Horizon to become very cynical. But yeah, I think, you know, I think that was the North.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, very informative. Thank you. Again, I think our time is up with you at this point here. Again, we all these speakers, we go on for days if we had to here, but little snippets, and we're gonna have a variety, how to using mediation to cool off the heated planet. Thank you so much, Mark. We're going to, at that point, again, introduce our next speaker. First of all, we have two speakers. We have Peter and Beth Ornstein. At first, I'm going to introduce Peter Ornstein. He's president of Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Projects. And just those 4 words, Sustainable Palestinian Israeli Projects. I mean, it's I'm hoping there are some here. We're going to enlighten us there because you don't hear all those words in the sentence very often. So Peter, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you're going to speak? Thank you. Unmute yourself, please, Peter.
Thank you. Can you, are we good? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm Peter Ornstein, president of Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Projects. I am also a member of Colorado Mediation Center, and I've taught law at the University of Denver Law School, and I was with the Environmental Protection Agency as a deputy regional counsel for many years. Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Projects is a nonprofit NGO that also we use the acronym SIP, S-I-P-P, and I'll be using that through our presentation.
Thank you, Peter. And at this point, let's introduce Beth Ornstein, if you will. She is also founder and manager of Colorado Mediation Center, secretary of Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Projects USA. Beth?
Hi,
welcome.
thanks, John. I appreciate being invited here today. It's not the usual mediation situation, as Peter will explain. We're not in the business and SIP of doing mediation, but we're going to talk about mediation principles that we've reflected upon and how they played a role in the work that we do. So again, I founded Colorado Mediation Center. I've been doing that for over 20 years, mainly as a mediator. I provide other dispute resolution services, and I'm on the board of SIP.
Welcome, thank you. So I think we'll join the two of you. You can speak about it now. Thank you for the introductions. Peter and Beth, we'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much. We are honored to be speakers and as an inviter, being invited to speak at the World Mediation Congress. Our experience as mediators was one of the drivers that helped us to create SIP in a way to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a positive way. What we're going to talk about today is ways in which mediation principles are at the core of the work that we are doing through SIP with Israelis and Palestinians. These mediation principles include impartial third-party assistance, safe physical distancing, safe physical environment, flexibility, focus on needs and interests, open and honest discussion, individual dignity, mutual understanding, and self-determination. Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Projects was founded in 2015. We work with Israeli and Palestinian organizations to address environmental concerns that impact the diverse communities in the region. We have found that being an American organization allows us to provide third-party neutral expertise in areas such as waste management and sustainability. SIP does not mediate disputes. What we do is we work with and we assist some of the many grassroots organizations and the individuals who are interested in doing work to address problems that affect the Israeli and Palestinians and also promote peace building. We also do not pretend that we are trying to directly solve the larger and extremely complex Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we try to steer clear of politics. Rather, we focus on smaller issues, issues that help individuals at the grassroots level to see the larger conflict from a different perspective. The work we do has two overlapping focuses: the environment and civil society. Our environmental work ranges from water pollution, waste management and sanitation, to environmental education and assisting off-grid communities create sustainable energy sources. Our civil society projects include projects that teach Arabic to Jewish school children in Tel Aviv, and teach Hebrew to Bedouin women in unrecognized villages in the Negev, to also supporting a pair of Jewish and Palestinian graduate students to study and work together at Ben Gurion University. This slide describes our 2021 mini grant awardees. We launched the mini grant program to expand our network of partners and to support grassroots people-to-people initiatives that are in line with our mission. I want to just give a little more context with these maps. As in mediation, the use of language is very important in working with Israeli and Palestinian communities. Maps themselves, both in labels and depictions, can contribute to the conflict, and it is important to be aware of this work as an impartial third party. For example, the Google map on the left depicts Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, that as was captured by Israel from Egypt and Jordan in 1967. The West Bank may be considered Judea and Samaria by some Israelis, or the occupied West Bank by some Palestinians, and so on. Use of such language or depictions are not helpful. Looking at the map on the right, under the Oslo Accords of the mid-1990s, the West Bank was temporarily partitioned into areas A, B, and C. Area A, which is the teal colored, are major Palestinian cities under Palestinian civil control. Area B are small, which is the tan colored brown, are the smaller Palestinian villages under mixed Israeli and Palestinian civil administration. And Area C, which is the gray area, are the under complete Israeli control. The Israeli settlements that you've read about and heard about are in Area C. Palestinians, Israeli citizens are not allowed in areas A and can get into areas B, but only with difficulty. Palestinians need to travel through checkpoints when traveling through Area C, and if they wish to enter Israel proper, they need a permit. As we know, pollution does not obey political borders on a map, and these maps do not portray just how proximate the Jewish, the Arab, the Palestinian, and the Bedouin communities are to one another. Pollution in one area is very likely to affect multiple communities. The two projects that Beth is going to talk about shortly are an electronic waste issue with a focus near Hebron, or in Arabic, it's Al-Khachil. And Hebron on the right map is located down in the south of the West Bank. And the area that we will be talking about is this area adjacent to Hebron. And the second project is a workshop related to transboundary pollution of the Hebron-Besor stream, which starts near Hebron al-Khalil and then crosses into Israel. I'm going to go to the other map. From Hebron, crosses into Israel, goes through Beersheba, and then out into Gaza. So that's the next part of the discussion.
So now we're going to look at ways in which mediation principles have been integral to the two projects that Peter noted, the one in Edna and the one relating to the Hebron-Besor stream. We've identified these principles as being fundamental to mediation and to SIP's work, providing a safe physical environment, being flexible, focusing on needs and interests, open and honest discussion, individual dignity, mutual understanding, self-determination, and impartial third-party assistance. SIP aims to provide impartial assistance that ensures self-determination for our partners and participants. This means that we follow the lead of our partners on the ground. We need to be flexible in creating a safe environment that encourages open and honest discussions, focusing on the community's needs and interests, recognizes the dignity of each partner or participant, and promotes mutual understanding. Now, in this work, naturally, we run into challenges. And just as in mediation, we carefully need to consider logistical details and be flexible as circumstances change. SIP is constantly learning about the challenges in working with Israelis and Palestinians, so we try to learn from our mistakes. One example is location and navigating borders. As shown on the maps, Palestinians must obtain permits to travel across the Green Line into Israel, and Israelis are only free to travel to Area C. This can make it difficult to find a neutral location for cross-border work. Obtaining permits for Palestinians to enter Israel can also be challenging. Language is another example of a challenge. Palestinians don't necessarily speak Hebrew, and Israelis don't necessarily speak Arabic. Often communication using English language is a way to add neutrality to the projects. And as we see in this conference, it's a way of bridging differences between a lot of different cultures. As Peter indicated, we have to be careful in the use of our language to avoid focus on specific issues rather than political differences. We're trying to use both Arabic and Hebrew names when describing places, even though pronouncing them may be challenging for us. Political circumstances and policies absolutely affect our work. Since 2015, SIP's work has been directly impacted by violence, which restricted cross-border travel. America's changing relationship with the Palestinians, including funding, has affected the work, and the anti-normalization pressure on Palestinians not to work with Israelis can make it challenging. So let's see how the mediation principles were integral to the two projects where SIP worked with the same two organizations. The first is an Israeli NGO, Arab Jewish Center for Empowerment, Equality, and Cooperation, Negev Institute for Strategies of Peace and Economic Development. We're going to call it AJIC, whose primary focus is Bedouin and Arab and Jewish populations in Israel. The other group is the Palestinian NGO, Greenland Society for Health Development. Their focus is promoting health services and environmental awareness in Palestine. So the first project related to electronic waste. The first project began in 2015 when we were in conversation with AJIC. We were just meeting them and learning about their work. We applied the principle of listening for needs and interests. As we were discussing potential opportunities for cross-border work, we learned that some Israeli electronic waste was ending up in Palestinian communities near Hebron al-Khalil, east of the Green Line. Electronic waste were basically anything that gets plugged in or carries electricity. We learn that they are refurbished and resold in local markets, or the metals are reclaimed and resold to Israelis. The easiest but most dangerous way to recover the metals is by simply burning the components in pits in nearby open fields. This burning was and continues to be dangerous to residents on both sides of the Green Line.
The burning of electronic components and cables release a significant amount of toxins, including heavy metals and hydrocarbons, into the air, soil, and nearby waterways. The health effects to the workers and the community and nearby communities, both Palestinian and Israeli, are significant. For example, in one study, nearby Palestinian communities had elevated blood lead levels, which can impair cognitive development. The same study also showed much higher level of miscarriages in communities that were further from the burning.
Ajik had an existing relationship with the Greenland Society, and the Greenland Society was conducting a study, the one Peter referenced, supported by the EU, relating to the health impacts from the open burning. We began to think of ways that we could provide impartial third-party assistance to both groups. Ajik and Greenland were interested in following up with us to see if we could come up with a plan to work together to address their concerns relating to electronic waste. SIP connected with the local American e-waste expert and current SIP board member, Ann Peters. During numerous pre-Zoom phone meetings with both organizations, we followed several principles of mediation. First, we identified needs of Palestinian and Israeli communities. We developed an understanding of the political and economic constraints under which both communities operated, and we worked to develop a plan for a way that we, as an impartial American NGO, could be of assistance. It was decided that Ann and Peter would present a workshop on occupational safety for Palestinians in Idna near the burning sites in the West Bank or Palestine. These were open and honest discussions, allowing us to better understand each other's needs and to design a safe environment. Ann and Peter traveled to the region where they provided the workshop in Idna and also at Tel Aviv University and at Al-Quds University. While the Greenland Society workshop was well received, the experience revealed a little bit of our naivete and the need for flexibility. The opening slide featured our SIP logo, which is Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Projects. To avoid making the presentation political, it turned out it would be helpful to remove the logo because it included the word Israeli. This was not acceptable in the existing political environment. Based on this thing that we learned, SIP later decided to put all of our environmental work into a new initiative, which is called Environmentally Sustainable Projects, an initiative of SIP. This enables us to work with Palestinians on environmental matters while lessening the potential for endangering participants. The second project that I want to discuss is the Green Ambassadors project. This past year, just before COVID-19 shutdowns, and I guess that started in 2019, we worked again with Ajik and the Greenland Society as co-recipients of a grant from the US Embassy for a 3-workshop program relating to ecotourism in the Hebron Besor Basin for Israeli Jewish, Israeli Bedouin, and West Bank Palestinian participants. SIP board member Bernard Amadei and I led interactive presentations as part of the second workshop that related to sustainability, systems, facilitation, and communication skills. Mediation principles were important to the planning of this program. Principles of flexibility and safety influenced the choice of location for the workshop. Our original plan was to hold the workshop in Area C, a location where everyone could attend. However, it turned out that traveling to the selected location posed challenges for the Bedouin women participants. In respect for their needs, and after being advised that there would not be a problem with obtaining permits for the Palestinians from the West Bank, the program location was changed to Beersheba, Israel, which is the headquarters of Ajik. Unfortunately, The day prior to the workshop, we learned that Palestinian participants were delayed due to unexpected problems relating to the dates on the permits. This is not uncommon. Despite the permitting delay, we managed to adjust our schedules and the workshop took place, though we did begin a little late. Another example of the need for flexibility to best meet the needs of the participants related to language. In planning the workshop series, we had decided that all participants should be fluent in English. This would not only allow SIP to participate, but would create a neutral and safe environment for open discussions. However, in recruiting participants, Ajik and the Greenland Society determined that there were a couple of participants who could really benefit from and contribute to the workshops, but they were not fluent in English. Therefore, we arranged sponsors to help with translation. We even had a surprise Jordanian guest who helped with Arabic translation for part of the time. He's actually pictured on the left side of one of those photos on the screen. It was great to be flexible enough to benefit from the full participation of each person, each one bringing their own unique perspective to the program. In the workshop itself, participants learned about common cross-border environmental challenges that their communities face. The workshop culminated with a role play based on an eco-peace study of the Hebron-Besor Basin to explore the varied perspectives, concerns, and interests of the region's diverse stakeholders. Our initial plan was to have the participants assume the roles of stakeholders other than themselves. For example, Palestinians would assume Israeli roles, and Jewish Israelis would assume Bedouin or Palestinian roles. However, and partially due to time constraints, the participants wanted to assume roles based on their own identities. Following the mediation principles of respecting individual dignity and promoting self-determination, we remained flexible and followed their lead. As we completed the workshop, the participants reflected that they had learned a lot from working through a fact-based role play with people with whom they would normally never interact and who had different perspectives. This created seeds for the mediation principle of mutual understanding. Between the discussions about the interconnectedness of the environmental systems, the presentations of different communication styles, and culminating with the role play, the participants came away with a new way to look at the needs and challenges of cross-border issues. And
the work that SIP does and the projects we support incorporate mediation principles to allow us to achieve our mission. We do this through partnering with Israeli and Palestinian organizations in applying for large institutional grants, by partnering with those organizations through much smaller grants that we can provide, by networking the different organizations one to each other, and by directly providing technical expertise, and by supporting educational efforts that encourage groups and individuals to interact with one another or to learn more about the environmental issues that can directly affect their well-being. We believe that our approach helps increase the personal and social capital of the individuals involved, and not only helps to empower them as individuals, but helps them to perceive the larger conflict in different ways. We believe that this approach will help create a healthier environment for everyone in the region and ultimately lead to resolution of the overall conflict. Thank you again for the opportunity to present some of the work we do, and please feel free to reach out to us for more information. And we look forward to your questions.
Peter, Beth, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I think we all learned a lot about something that is so in the news currently. It is something that has been discussing the political turmoil in both Israel and Palestine is something I think everyone in the world has been following. And I think some of the questions we've received reflects that perspective. The first question we have, if you're ready for it, is how do you prevent indefinite delays when it comes to any cross-border projects? Because making sure a project is finished within a period of time is also a big proponent of sustainability. So when there are issues like permits and language barriers and people not being able to access certain parts of the countries, how do you try to reconcile those delays?
I think again, and flexibility is the key word here. We've had all sorts of issues thrown at us over the last year, especially related to COVID, and also with respect to American policies that have played out there and have reflected back on us as being Americans. So it's what we've done is work with our Palestinian partners and just be as flexible as we can. Where people need more time, we grant it. Where we can provide some additional assistance, we do that. And we've also worked, some of our focus has shifted a little bit to some of the cross-cultural work within Israel proper. We're working with Israeli Arab and Bedouin communities and Israeli Jewish communities.
Well, one issue with delay is ameliorated, I guess, when the work is done in one location. So we work with an environmental education center run by the Greenland Society, and there's no need for going cross-border for that. So we don't have those permitting delays. And the same when the work is done within the boundaries of, at least within the undisputed boundaries of Israel.
All right. And what about any transboundary obligations that you may have? For example, you mentioned that transboundary pollution is something that is a very big reality down there. And there are a lot of, say, state laws with respect to regulation of transboundary pollution or any impact assessment. So how would that scenario play out cross-border?
You know, I think what we do is we work with our on-the-ground partners. So we're not, while we may meet with political and governmental officials, our main work is through the partners themselves. So where if there is an issue, transboundary issues, whether it be water pollution or waste management streams, we're working through our network on the ground. With respect to the electronic waste, it's still an ongoing issue and it's an ongoing project. We did the education piece that Beth mentioned. We're looking at expanding that to see if we can work with the Palestinian communities to develop a recycling enterprise, a Palestinian-run recycling enterprise. That would have to be done through whatever channels are that the Palestinian Authority creates, and there has to be cross-border cooperation with Israelis. All that's in the future, and that's just something that we will work through our partners to, to see what we can do to help grease the wheels and network that.
Another question we have coming in is, do you or have you in your experience seen that a mediation approach and sensitization has helped address even the political bias that is already rooted between these two countries? Do you believe that has helped at all to change the perspectives of at least those involved in these specific projects?
I'll start, Beth, and then you follow. I think we are working at the grassroots level, so we're working at the small level. We haven't been around that long, but with respect to our partners or the people that we're working with and the people that they're working with, it is, I believe, having a larger impact. We're leveraging, we don't have a lot of resources. We leverage our resources with other organizations. We network, we try to coordinate work. So many NGOs in this region, stovepipe, they just do their work. We try to work with the other NGOs. And I think ultimately at least with a smallish number of people that we've worked with, it has paid some dividends. Beth?
A couple of years ago, Peter and I attended a conference on conflict resolution in Tel Aviv, and we learned about so many grassroots organizations that are doing this work. And as a result, we learned about a group that we wanted to join, which is called ALMEP, and it's the Alliance for Middle East.
Yes.
Okay. And they've gotten all of these organizations, they've lobbied to get more funding for projects to bring people together, the mediation approach of having dialogue. And there are just hundreds of organizations doing this work, or at least 150 member organizations of ALMEP. And so that's encouraging to know that people are out there, the approach is desired. But then things blow up and politically, and have to step back and move forward. But I know there were lots of demonstrations in support of peace within Israel with mixed groups of Israelis and at least Palestinian Israelis as well. And there were differences too. But I think the approach is out there. People are aware of it. There's a lot of what we used in the training. We used a very basic approach to nonviolent communication. And I know that's used widely in the area as compassionate listening. So I know there's a lot of openness. Just have to take advantage of the opportunities to make it happen.
All right, so I believe one last question before I think we can move ahead. What is the status right now in terms of everything that is happening politically? Would you say your work has come to a stop, or has it increased in light of everything that is going on right now?
I think that the bigger impact was COVID, which shut down operations in Palestine and also in Israel. And while Israel's opened up pretty much, Palestine still is in the process of doing that. That all said, our partners have told us that they're getting back on track. And we're going to launch another mini grant program shortly. And we hope to attract even more partners going forward. So I think I'm pretty optimistic. I think the political the conflict in Gaza and within Israel and the new government in Israel, all that happens, but it's still the work that we've been doing is the people on the ground just recognize that there'll be conflicts there and it's time to move on. It passes, and even the political climate changes. We're still hopeful that we're moving forward. And what we're doing, just to reiterate, is that what we're trying to change is the perceptions of people on the ground and how they look at the other. And I think we are having that kind of impact. And by doing that, if you do that more and more and more, you change perspectives and lays the groundwork for a broader peace.
Well, that would have been a great concluding remark, but I have one other thing too, just about the environment, which is, the environment is a common interest to everyone, and we are trying to find people to find ways to see that everybody has an interest in this work. And there are plenty of groups that do that. There's the RFI Environmental Institute in Israel that has students and faculty from the West Bank, and they've sometimes had people from Gaza, from Israel, from Jordan. The Jordanian who joined us for that program was a graduate of the RFI Institute. And there are a lot of people in the region who realize that these environmental issues affect everyone and want to work together over that. So there is a lot of desire, and we just need to build on that to help them understand each other and make it happen.
All right, thank you so much for that additional comment, Beth. Peter, thank you so much for sharing your insights into something that, as I already said, is something that is so important right now to learn about and understand. And I think with that, I just want to pass it on to John so he can take it forward.
Thank you, Rihanna, and thank you, Peter and Beth. Very informative. I again understand the limited amount of time we have, but I tell you, all these speakers today, we want to thank all of them: Dr. Kevin Brown, Mark Holstein, Beth, and Peter Ornstein. Very informative and useful. I mean, not just today, but in the future, people that will listen to this, students that of ours and other schools. Your words will live on for quite a while, and your message and your good deeds. So we thank all of you. I think summarizing out that we heard today, understanding is the word. Perspective, look at a different viewpoint, understanding the other party's perspective. I guess in a word, you could summarize it. It's a common theme, which we see here oftentimes with our speakers. So now we're going to take a 10-minute break for everybody. We'll organize our concluding presentation, which will be a panel discussion. We have 4 speakers, and we welcome you after about 10 minutes, if you will. Please join us then. Thank you so much. Welcome again to our final presentation, and we have a panel discussion for the International Academy of Dispute Resolution World Mediation Congress, Common Ground Using Mediation to Cool Off a Heated Planet. We have 4 speakers coming up here, myself and RAYANA MUKHERJEE from Bhopal. She's actually, the school's in Bhopal, NLIU. She's in Calcutta, India. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. So welcome everybody. At this point, we'll 4 speakers. I'll introduce each one of them. They'll get about 5-minute presentation on their various subjects. And then we'll put them all together, RAYANA, myself, and the 4 speakers, and have a nice discussion. And I look forward to it, and we all do. So first speaker will be Dr. Anna Plevry, Assistant Professor, Accredited Mediator, Certified Mediators Trainer, and Legal Scholar. Hello, Anna. Join us, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today. Greetings from Nicosia, Cyprus. As you said, I'm an assistant professor of civil procedure and INADR at the University of Nicosia, the School of Law. I'm Greek, and I live between actually Cyprus and Greece. Right now, I'm in Nicosia. And I'm very pleased that I'm going to discuss with you medical mediation and medical malpractice claims and how ADR methods can contribute to this shame. Thank you very much.
Yes, Anna, if you want to go on and make a short presentation, 5 minutes or so, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start now.
Yes,
okay.
yes, yeah. We'll give about 5 minutes each speaker, and then we'll bring you all together. Thank you.
I will try to present you how mediation can contribute to the resolution of medical malpractice disputes. We do know that mediation has certain benefits in comparison to litigation and other methods. It's time effective. It's a voluntary process. It's a process where the parties have the opportunity and actually the power to choose the mediator and to have control on the dispute. Also, the outcome of mediation is binding and enforceable for the parties according to legislation of each state, of course, and the procedure of mediation is totally confidential. This means that any information disclosed during mediation may not be used in subsequent proceedings, the without prejudice element. This is crucial when it comes to medical malpractice claims in connection with the reputation and fame and personal information of both individuals and corporations. Through mediation, the parties have the chance to restore and to preserve their relationships, the future relationships, or even create opportunities for further cooperation. So the litigation battle creates enemies, mediation does not. And there is a human aspect in every conflict, and this has its own role in the mediation procedure. Also, the cost of mediation in comparison to other methods, there is a clear advantage of mediating, especially early in the timeline of a dispute. When it comes to medical malpractice, I'm going to refer to the Hippocrates Oath, which contains a fundamental role for any physician: do no harm. The grounds of civil medical liability could be formulated in 2 categories. Firstly, there are cases where a physician attempts medical practice without the required by law, prior and informed patient consent. Secondly, there are cases of medical error, such as error of medication, surgery, and medical treatment. So in case of medical errors, there is room for mediation in certain claims. In the UK and in the US, as far as I know, there is mediation as an ADR mechanism, and not only mediation, but arbitration too. They are used by patients, hospitals and health professionals, doctors and their colleagues, and all those medical disputes, they are appropriate to be resolved via mediation. In the US, more specifically, the ADR processes most commonly used in healthcare cases are arbitration, mediation, early neutral evaluation, and mini trials. The complexity of many healthcare disputes, the fact that the parties desire to continue in business, I mean, especially the hospitals, and many other features of ADR methods make these processes more advantageous for healthcare parties to use rather than litigation. I would like to refer to a project, a medical mediation project that embraces the interests of all involved parties and contributes to the risk management of the dispute and promote the positive image of the healthcare institution and of the medical staff too. There is a project in the University of Michigan Health System, an excellent example. Since 2004, the University of Michigan Health System applies this innovative approach to medical errors and patient safety. And they call it the Michigan model. It includes a medical error disclosure program that a series of timely conversation, open discussion, communication with the patient and the family members after an adverse event or a medical error, an apology, the so-called policy of saying sorry, and an offer of fair compensation. As a result, this program has substantially and steadily reduced the number of malpractice claims against the university and its liability costs. And it has instituted many changes to their clinical care based on lessons learned from patient complaints. They could summarize their policy as apologize and learn when we're wrong, explain and defend when we're right, and view court as a last resort. There are other projects such as the mediation ADR project in Pennsylvania under the title Medical Error Disclosure, Mediation Skills and Malpractice Litigation. It offers 4 important recommendations that hold potential for easing the medical liability problem. And these are to provide communication training to doctors and administrators, to create and consult service of communication experts within the hospital to help plan conversations with patients and family members and provide emotional support to healthcare providers involved in errors. Offer apologies when appropriate, offer early non-evaluative mediation that bring patients or family members together with health professionals to share information and seek solutions. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to be very eager to discuss with you the rest.
All right, thank you so much, Anna. I think that was a wonderful discussion from your end. I think we can have the next speaker now, who is Anurup Omkar, who is a lawyer, mediator, and a mediation trainer, and is a partner with the law firm AK & Partners, and also a director with Bridge Policy. So Anurup, if we could please have you on screen, if you could just unmute yourself.
Thanks, RAYANA, for the introduction. As rightly put, apart from legal practice, I've been actively practicing mediation, not just in terms of mediation, but also bringing about the requisite policy changes, because there is no shame in admitting India is catching up as compared to the global mediation market. But yes, it has caught up really well in the last 5 to 6 years. So when I saw this topic about mediation in medical or healthcare services, I was little hesitant to be a party to it, because it has really not seen a great light of day, at least in the B2C segment in India. But it has done fairly well, I would say, in the B2B segment, because rather than looking at it as a medical service, it can be seen as a customer and a service provider relationship, or a hospital buying medical equipments, or a hospital renting medical equipments and stuff like that. So, I was just, for, preparing for this webinar, I was, trying to Google out statistics about healthcare sector as a whole in India. And I just realized that in spite of the fact that, we have a primary, or rather say a government-driven medical facility and a private-driven medical facility, and the gap between the government-driven medical facility and private medical facility in terms of cost is close to 74% less than the private service provider. But in the urban areas, only 77 less than, let's put it the other way around, 77% don't believe in going to government given provided medical facilities in urban areas, and 72% do not prefer to go to medical facilities provided by government in the rural areas. So given that we get to understand the Indian medical industry is divided into public and private. That too, there are various categories. What is government aided, what is NGO run, what is a private trust, what's a public trust, and a informal health service provider, which may not be existing in other nations in the world, but is very common that not everybody who practices medicine in India is a degree holder who does that. So there are homemade remedies. A lot of our moms are semi-doctors in a way whenever we fall sick. So, keeping them aside, how I see mediation coming in. So, just to set the context right, I believe mediation is the intensive care after the major surgery. So what I mean by the surgery is the conflict that comes out in the process of activities in the medical service industry. Either it's a B2C or B2B. So after you have undergone a major surgery, you are not expected to run on your treadmill at a high speed. So you need to go to an intensive care. So mediation works as that intensive care because it keeps into account what all intensive care keeps into account. Either it is empathy, that basic nurturing approach of mediation, the positivity approach of mediation, and that's how I see it suitable. What my previous panelists just spoke, it's a confidential process. And no one wants, none of us here would want everyone on the screen should know what ailments I undergo. So it's a very inherent part of our existence, the physical existence. So anything in and around it, we all would love to have it confidential. And, as they say, it's human to err. So you can't even expect doctors or anyone, working in a medical profession to be gods without mistakes. I'm sure even gods do mistakes as well. So given that, if you don't bring in a confidential, empathetic process, it can be utter chaos. So, just bringing in a little bit of practical experience that I've seen, which is more on the B2B side. I remember one of the matter, and I wrote about it in one of the newspapers also in India. So what had happened is, there were service providers. So in India, what typically happens, wherever there is a hospital, you see an ecosystem developing around it. The ecosystem would mean, there would be a dispensary giving medicines. There would be a, medical equipments company providing medical equipments. And a lot of this works on a credit line basis. It's not like you go and pay and you only get it because someone needs to be, urgently operated on. So you can't just say, boss, you need to pay me $200, only then I'm going to give you this equipment. So, there is a very traditional way how to maintain lasers, maintain those books that this is the amount of, equipments that I've supplied to the hospital. This is on credit. And, once in a month, the accounts are settled. One of my cases, what happened is suddenly the ownership of that, hospital got transferred to the hands of another hospital group. And suddenly those ecosystem around put together, a number of 6 to 7 shops or medium industries. They had supplied equipments to certain $100,000 to the company. And then when they started sending their request to release the payment, the previous owners who moved out, they did not even care to respond to them. And these guys did not know that the old management has moved to the hands of the new management who are the new owners. So given that these guys were completely perplexed, every time they wanted to go and meet like the senior manager or the floor manager in the existing hospital, he said, we don't know you. We have no relationship. So please stop bothering us. Go back to your old ones. When they tried to reach the old management, they said, we are no more the owners of the company. We have sold it off. Plus, as I said, it's a very informal market. They did not have a contract in place. It's a very trust-oriented activity that was being carried out. So they had no option but to go to mediation, because typically if they had have gone to a court, the court would have said, listen, guys, you do not have enough contract to be put in place. You do not have any evidence to prove that your contract is violated because you don't primarily have a document. Sorry, boss, I can't entertain you. So when they came to me, came to rather, let's say, mediation service provider, and I was appointed as one of the mediators, what struck me is to check the, the shareholders agreement that is in place and the purchase agreement that was signed between both of them to understand what liabilities have been transferred to the new owner, what the liabilities that has been kept with the old owner. So when I went through the agreement, I realized it clearly states that everything has been transferred to the new owner. And then after I had to call the new owner and say, listen, boss, you have clearly violated the terms. You should not have been playing around with these people. You should pay them something, if not the entirety. I think they slashed it out to 40% less. And they gave out the money where those small shopkeepers could survive because they had loan. So this is one of my reality experience with mediation in B2B, and I see a great room for it. And would leave because I have been given signals of compressing the time. So I'd just stop here, allow my other co-speakers to speak and join the panel discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you. Again, we want to give everybody a few minutes and then we'll have a panel discussion to hear more from you. So thank you so much. Our third speaker will be Jonathan Rodriguez. Jonathan, welcome. He's trained and certified mediator, leader of online dispute mediation vertical at Camp Mediation. Welcome, and tell us where you're physically at here also. Jonathan, unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that introduction. I'm joining you guys from Goa. That's on the west coast of India. It's getting battered by the rains, so please excuse me if I lose connection and I'll try to jump back on straight away. It's good to be with some familiar faces here. Hi, Anna, Anurup, Prathamesh. It's good to see you all here on this panel. I want to put out a couple of disclaimers before I start, and that is that I have very little experience in mediating medical negligence cases or healthcare cases back in India. I did have the lovely privilege of observing one and co-mediating a few back in the UK. And so what I did is I did go back to my notes to refresh some of my memories from there. And I reached out to some folks back in India to understand how they are doing things and to understand the psychology of mediation in these kind of cases. So I'm coming to you from a mental health perspective. To look at how we can take care of mediation with regards to healthcare services. And so bear with me for the next 5 minutes, because that's the perspective I'm trying to bring to the table here. So you have folks, and of course, healthcare service is not just about medical negligence cases. You have, all kinds of cases that can be mediated, and we'll come back to that about suitability of cases for mediation. But let's take, for example, a medical negligence case, right? You have the family on one side. The person could either be dead or grievously injured, and he or she cannot be doing what he or she was doing all this while, right? So you have a family member who is struggling with loss, anger, frustration. It could be loneliness. They could be sleep deprived. They could be not eating, and this all adds up to their mental health. And there they are sitting at the table, trying to sort things out with the other side. We have to be careful about their state of mind when they are at the table. On the other side, you have doctors. So a doctor who's probably responsible for the situation that is taking place. They are undergoing a sense of, say, failure, frustration, fear of the wrath that they're about to face from, say, the family. And that could lead to, to moments of depression or just being mentally unfit. So here are two people, and that's something we kind of should be taking into consideration when we're getting into mediation with regards to healthcare services, the mental health of our parties at the table. Not that it's not relevant in other cases, but especially in this case where someone is going to grieve, it's very, very crucial that we are aware of the mental health of the parties. And I like what Anna said in the start when she spoke about making sure that there's non-evaluative early mediation, right? The point of making sure it's non-evaluative. So there is scope for understanding these things which are very important to the party. So I think for us as mediators, if we are faced with a situation where there's a medical negligence case, and if we feel like the parties are struggling with their mental health, then one of our first duties is to make sure that we identify that they are struggling with it. We speak to them directly about it. We listen to them non-judgmentally about it, and then try and guide them to professional services. Of course, we are not therapists and we are not psychotherapists. Of course, I'm talking on my behalf here. There might be a psychotherapist who's also a mediator. But then once again, you might want to put on one hat for that day. The point is, guide them towards relevant services before you start the mediation, but that could be very crucial to whether that mediation progresses constructively or not. Another few things that I want to bring up, because I have a few minutes more, is the assumptions that we should get off our mind when we're getting into these kind of cases. It cannot be treated like any other commercial case, right? Having said that, what I learned from my limited experience is that we tend to judge people, especially the members of the grieving family, and say, how can they be all about the money? You know, they've just lost someone. How can they be fighting for money? How can it be just they have no emotion for someone they've just lost, maybe? And that's not right, because for a lot of people, money is important. The financials is what allows them to move ahead. So money is important at the end of the day. Second thing that we need to keep in mind is that they are journeying to different levels of grief, right? So if you're mediating medical negligence cases or healthcare cases, these are people who are journeying to different levels of grief. So you might have someone who is, at a stage where they're still in denial of what's happened. And so we have to be aware of the situations before we get started and try and find common ground and try and brainstorm solutions, because it might be just too early for these folks sitting in a mediation table. Empathy, we talk a lot about empathy in mediation, but is empathy enough in a medical negligence case, or do we need something more beyond empathy, right? We talk about justice. I think justice is completely irrelevant in a medical negligence case. How can you justify anything you might come up with as a settlement to bring back someone you've lost, right? So from my experience, from my very limited experience of observing and being part of a few of these cases, is that it's not justice that the other side is looking for, the grieving side is looking for. They're looking for healing, they're looking for peace, and most importantly, they're looking for security, because they've lost someone, and it could be financial security, it could be emotional security. And these are things that I think we really need to be aware of if we have to get into mediating these kind of cases. So I want to wrap up that with the statement, are we ready to be handling medical negligence cases or healthcare service cases with regards to mediation, especially in a mediation, in a jurisdiction where mediation is still growing like India. And I think the best person to give us an insight into that is my next co-panelist, Mr. Popat. Thank you so much.
Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think it was a very different perspective than we ordinarily would take with respect to the healthcare services. And without any further ado, I would like to invite our next panelist, Prathamesh Popat, who is a mediator, a mediation trainer, and an ADR consultant. He's also the founder of Prachi Resolutionary, Academic, and Conflict Handling Initiatives in India. So if Mr. Popat, you could please unmute yourself and come on screen and share your wonderful insights.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jonathan, for setting the stage for my few thoughts. Firstly, we need to understand that in India, we do have the private sector trying to catch up very fast, swiftly with the public services that are already on offer by the government. In fact, very recently, our central government has introduced medical insurance for just about everybody, every citizen in India. And I see that as a great impetus for not only medical services being available and generously available, but also from some personal experience, I also find a great deal of scope for mediation to have a say and play a very great role in the disputes that are likely to arise. Because firstly, what we call the traditional understanding of the medical profession is that it's a service. Of late, we find in the last decade, several corporate hospitals have come up on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is a lot of medical insurance happening. And therefore, you find a lot of overbilling happening in several cases. In some institutions, some hospitals are very chronic in doing those things. So that's one area which will really require a great deal of mediation, but more so where we look at two other things. One is there is a growing population which is becoming aware of more opportunities of being taken care of better. Like earlier days, we used to have this anath ashrams, old age homes, but nowadays we find gated communities being created and people investing in them for their retirement plans. And there also we will be finding opportunities for the medical facilities being provided over there on an ongoing basis. And the third thing, which is a real major thing, is that India is not soon, but actually already has become to a great extent a hub for medical tourism. And what I mean by that is that you find places all across the globe, people coming to India for getting their operations done. And they are done in a very, very cost-effective way. Manner. I'll tell you from my personal experience, I live in a city which is the financial capital of India, Mumbai, earlier known as Bombay, on the western coast, sharing the same coast with Jonathan. And in India, when I'm in Bombay, I'm paying, let's say, about $1,000 for some operation that I'm taking, I had to undergo. And the same thing gets done under $100 in a tier 3 city. I happen to be in that city for some other reason, but I had a medical emergency and it had to be done there. So it got done at 1/10 of the cost, in fact, even less. So you can understand that in that comparison, when you come to India from some other developed country, then your medical bill is much less. And there I find that, again, the medical insurance and the mediation facilities requiring to be established so that we can have what we understand in the mediation field as empathetic services being provided. And for that purpose, we do require quite a many of mediators who are trained in the empathetic sense. Again, here I find being chairman of the mediation committee in one chamber of commerce in Mumbai and being M-panel at several places at the High Court and other institutions. I find that everywhere there is a push for commercial mediation, maybe even family mediation, maybe divorce mediation. But there is really nobody talking about palliative care, elder care, and mediation in these fields, including the medical field. So I find that there is much scope, and I am thankful to the organizers for having invited me to speak on this point, because I feel this is a topic which should be taken up very seriously, considering all the developments that are taking place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all our speakers. Good. We have a good snapshot of where you come from, different viewpoint or different parts of medical issues, if you will. RAYANA, if you want to pop in there too. Thank you so much. We're going to facilitate some questions. We'll look on our feed here also. And one thing I'd like to suggest, maybe explain to us, all four of you in India, again, where does mediation come in, and is it available? You have public, you have private systems, you have wealthy, you have poor. The last speaker just indicated you have disparities in cost separated by so many kilometers or miles. Where is it that a patient or former patient gets into a mediation process? They have a dispute, whether it's the type of care, or the cost of the care, or the result of the care. How do they go there? Traditionally, you go to court, hire a lawyer if there's a dispute. But again, is it formalized, informalized, and is it available to all? Can somebody speak to that?
Yes.
There we go. Prathamesh, there we go.
Yeah. So traditionally, we have the consumers court, and therefore all the consumers of even the medical facilities make a beeline for the consumer court to have their disputes addressed in an adversarial way. Very recently, we have had that amendment added in the the Consumers Act, that disputes in the consumer court would require also to be mediated to the extent possible. And therefore, even the medical claims that would be going through the consumer court would land up before a mediator. And therefore, I say that we need some empathetic training for these mediators who are going to focus on parties who have had a personal loss, not just some commercial loss on a B2C basis or even B2B basis. And that's where I feel that training will come in. So to answer that question, we do have the Consumers Court, but once again, we are seeing this amendment, this addition of mediation being infused in just about every jurisdiction and in every other statute that we come across. Only thing that does not get answered to my satisfaction is that there should not be a need to go to court. There should be available a plethora of opportunities, organizations who are providing services for medical disputes, where you have maybe even just an ombudsman in a hospital, which has on its contract with the parties that you sign before some operation or any service, that should there be any issue about any medical facility or services that are provided to the patient, it should first go to the ombudsman, or at least should go to a mediator for resolution in an amicable way. So that's
very good. I think you bring out a key point there. It's like the availability of mediation. Instead of going the path to the court, which we all know, I'm assuming time and expense, possible lawyers, unavailable to all because of the financially or just not aware of these types of things. To the key is, I think, find a methodology. We all know that these processes work. They provide peace, if you will. The trick is, if you will, the difficulty is how to get it there initially, being instead of an alternative dispute resolution, to be a resolution of choice. Can have the other speakers today to see where it's been getting better, if we will. Somebody where this has been a little more acceptable.
I would like to contribute the mediation law, the Mediation Act of Greece. There is also in medical malpractice claims, if those claims are more than 30,000 euros, then there is a mandatory initial mediation session. And the parties, they can choose the mediators, but they have to sit at least for once around the table and discuss the potential of mediation. Of course, mediation is voluntary, but in these kinds of claims, if there is more than 30,000 euros, then there is a mandatory mediation session before hearing in front of the court. So this is a way for people also to be informed that there is this path too, because people they don't actually know, and there is also an obligation by law, by the Mediation Act, to all solicitors and barristers to inform people about mediation and medical mediation. And I agree that there are, Mr. Pat said it, there are around the globe, there are several hospitals and healthcare providers that they provide in the hospital, in the clinic, a medical mediation clinic, a medical mediation protocol, and settling the dispute in the hospital. Thank you.
You bring up a great point there too. I'm unaware of other places where this, through the bar associations, by law, the attorneys have to, clarifying if I'm correct here, is that have to inform clients that mediation is available, and not just medical cases, but all disputes. So that's unique. I have not heard of that. It's certainly not in Chicago where I practice here. That's a giant step, at least the duty to disclose to the individuals, to educate them.
Yes, you know, in Europe, it's the Italian example. We follow the Italian example since 2011. They have made huge steps, and this started from just from people knowing that there is this kind of option.
RAYANA, do you want to continue with the other speakers? Thank you.
Yes, John, thank you so much. I believe there's been a lot of discussion today from various speakers today about the concept of empathy and how important it is to introduce that element of empathy and being caring about your patients or those who have suffered. But how would you reconcile that from a commercial perspective? And I think this question is directed more towards Anurup. Since you spoke about this entire process as maybe a customer and a service provider perspective. So how would you bring in such a commercial concept with the concepts of empathy that has been discussed by everyone here?
Rihanna, I don't see that a commercial concept and empathy don't go hand in hand. That's possibly, overstretching the definition of capitalism or a capitalist thought. How I see is reasonable commercialism is required for a society to survive, because without commerce, a society cannot survive. So, very honestly speaking, in the B2B matter that I said, based on which I think this question came up to me, yes, the empathy allowed them to settle, but their commercialism did not allow them to settle for the full amount. So that's how I saw both of them coming together. Like, the new owners believed that this should have been clearly pointed out by the previous owners, but unfortunately their lawyers possibly had not done that great due diligence to find out what was the due that is to be paid. So that was a weaker part on their side. So based on which I started, educating them, saying that if the parties move to the court and claim this, there is a high possibility that the court will make you pay this plus some interest and penalty. So, their commercial brain, clicked, and they thought, rather than going to the court and paying a 12+% rate of interest, why not at least pay something now and close the matter? So that's their commercial side. But even, when you say commercial side, they being businessmen, they also knew that, overnight they cannot throw those shops out. So they had to anyway coexist with them. So it was not just the shops needed their empathy, but also these guys needed the empathy of the shops, so that in future, when they have to get something supplied to them at a very short notice or in a situation of emergency, they will need the support of this. So, again, I don't see it a conflicting point of view. I just see, the idea of mediation is everything is to be balanced. There's nothing right, there is nothing wrong, there is nothing good, there is nothing bad. It needs to be a perfect blend. Like, just in the morning, if you add 5 spoons of coffee, maybe you will, you have so much of caffeine rush, it would be difficult for you to go to sleep even at night. But if you don't have at least 2 spoons of coffee into the coffee mug, maybe you will not be able to wake up enough to do your legal work. So it's just a balance.
Thank you, Anurup. Thank you. One thing, Jonathan, I'd like to, is your presentation, you mentioned levels of grief. Again, you recognize the inherently emotional nature of the personal treatments in medical facilities. So it is always an inherently personal. Emotions probably run hot there too. How is it, again, there's all expression, no wine before it's time, referencing the aging in a barrel to the right time. How do you try to make sure the timing is right, or adjust the timing to the resolution? Or if the parties are still emotionally hot, the tea kettle's still boiling over, what are the techniques, again, cooling off a heated planet, how do you cool off a heated client in these situations?
Thanks, John. So I think before I get to that, I was just speaking to a senior retired medical officer, and he was telling me about why do we have, why is India drowning with medical negligence litigations today? And maybe, someone like Prathamesh could let me know whether we had this many cases, say 20, 30 years before the corporate hospitals came into being. And one of the reasons he said was it's very organic, right? There is a bit of a disconnect between the doctor and the patient today. Not just a bit of a disconnect, there's a huge disconnect. The people that you meet the moment you enter the hospital is not the doctor, it's the front desk staff who speak to you as if you're come to buy a TV or a fridge. right? There is no empathy shown right in the start. There is no emotional connect there that is shown to someone who's really physically, physiologically struggling. And that's the first impression that the person gets. So, and also when you go to a hospital, you're forced to trust in a service. You're not coming to a service that you already trust. You're forced to trust in a service that you have no clue about. And he compared this to what would happen, say, 20, 30 years ago, when you had individual physicians practicing from the village who would do a fantastic job. Now, he mentioned that they would make plenty of mistakes, which would cause, which would lead to a lot of deaths. But did you have anyone filing a medical negligence case against a physician in the countryside or in the town? Not that many. Why? Because there was that connect. The doctor told you exactly what you were getting into before you got any kind of diagnosis or treatment. And therefore, I think it starts off on a very commercial note. And that's the reason why you then have the case aggravated. So if the question is, how do you time it? I think, for instance, one of the biggest challenges for the mediators is to de-escalate that conflict, bring both parties, in this case, the hospital and the doctor, and try and make them empathize with what the patient's going through. Because until now, the patient and the family have only looked at the commercial side of the healthcare service. They have not really experienced, the human side. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, to see if you can bring them into that space of conversation, and if you can bring them into that space of conversation where they both agree to what has gone down in the facts, then I think that would be a good place to start with regards to these kind of cases. But once again, the million-dollar question is, are medical negligence cases suitable for mediation? Especially, as I say, in a jurisdiction that is still getting started. As Anup said, we have built tremendous momentum over the last 5 years, but we are still finding our feet with regards to commercial mediation. And there is a lot to be done till we get into this industry, in my opinion.
I think Mr. Popat, you'd commented on how there is a growing need, especially to take care of certain categories of society, especially with respect to medical negligence. So, would you maybe like to comment on what Jonathan just said about what is maybe the scope of India's ability to take on medical negligence suits into mediation as a concept? Would you maybe like to share your insights on that? I believe you're muted.
Sorry. As I see it, it's a great opportunity if only people like Anurup and Jonathan would take the lead and train others to do follow through with setting up institutions where you are focused more on an early intervention, where you already have in place some provision in the relationship between the hospital and the soon to become patient, or even the relatives, that they can avail of the mediation services, so that they do not have to go through the impersonal system of the court, but also to get for themselves that assurance, what we call that closure for themselves, through the mediation services that the hospital or some independent organization might provide for them. And I will just narrate one small anecdote of some US court, where a lady in the appeals court got some $5 million as compensation because her husband died. And when all the reporters were pushing their mics in her mouth and asking, so how do you feel? And she had just 2 words, bloody cheapos. He said, but what do you mean? You couldn't have earned $5 million in your whole life. He said they didn't have the courtesy to even say sorry once. So, and that's what I mean, that when we talk of empathy, this is what we want. A person does not get closure by 5 or 10 million. But if you apologize by looking them eye to eye, that we didn't mean that and it happened, and we are really sorry. We are here for you. Tell us what we can do to help you through this phase. And that's sometimes enough. Even $50,000 might have made her more happy with an apology rather than getting the 5 million after the whole adversarial journey that she took.
Prathamesh, you bring up a very important point, and everybody's shaking their heads on this too. We can see it the value of the mediation, where you can't get those types of things in the court of law. This gives you that personal connect and the power of the apology, if you will. Anna Plafferty, I can see you're shaking your head on that too. Can you speak to that, where the value of their, you reference it, Pratham, is the value of the putting the people together, is that the human element, where there's this cognitive dissonance, if you will, that there's disconnect between parties. Speak to the value of how to cool off the heated planet, to cool off the parties, how that puts the fire out. Can you speak to that?
Can I speak?
Sure, yes.
Yes,
Speak
I
to that.
I totally agree with Mr. Popat. This is the essence, actually. It's the essence of mediation and medical mediation. People need to hear an apology. People need to hear we are sorry. People, this is as crucial as monetary compensation, even more, I would say. I've been in medical mediations where the factor of the apology was the crucial one, and then the monetary compensation was a second thing. So people need to, first of all, people need to know what happened. So it's very crucial for the healthcare providers and the hospital, the clinic, the doctors, the physicians to explain what happened. What went wrong? Why did this happen, actually? And to even more, a step further, to ensure that this is not going to happen again, that they're going to implement a practice, a protocol, a procedure, a process, that they will take care of these kind of errors in other situations. And you know, if you have just lost your husband, your child, it's so big, it's so important. Then the first thing you want to know is what happened, why this happened, if this could be avoided, and how this is not going to happen again. And so those remedies are remedies that you cannot have in a court of law. You cannot have in a courtroom. There are remedies that this dynamic process of mediation, the human aspect of mediation can bring. It's the Mandela aspect of Ubuntu, the one that the humans take care of other humans, because it's a human process, actually. And information, communication, confidentiality, the fact that you have the process allows the parties to for example, the physicians, to admit things without the fear of liability. And this is very important too, as a tool, as a process. I had cases where the widow wanted to be sure that, and to have, you know, to promise her that they're going to implement other protocols and this will not happen again, or to implement the processes where the family will be informed prior and after the procedures, because information and consensus is another issue very important in these operations. So I totally agree. Apology, apology, and apology.
Thank you, Anna. RAYANA, any other questions you think? We probably will wrap it up here pretty soon here.
Yes, Sean, I think we've had a very similar discussion. I think everyone's come to a very similar conclusion on how medical negligence would go, but I think we haven't necessarily commented on how maybe a discussion would happen on how mediation could be facilitated between, say, healthcare workers and hospital authorities, because that's one of the largest growing concerns, especially with respect to COVID and the fact that a lot of doctors and nurses feel that they haven't been treated right. So if anyone would like to take that up and maybe say a few words on how even that dynamic can be explored through mediation.
Unmute yourself, Prath.
Yes. There are two pathways. One would be institutionalizing the whole process, either by the government coming up with some policy that all cases will stand referred to mediation. Alternately, each organization, each hospital could have their own in-house team of mediators or ombudsman office, which would take up those issues. Alternately, on an ad hoc basis, should there be situations which are so different from the usual. Like, for example, we had this COVID case where a person kept going to the hospital and they kept saying your relative is still under observation and getting better. But suddenly after 15 days, she was told that 15 days back, that relative expired and they had already disposed of the body. And such cases, you really don't know whom to blame. Is it the linesman? I mean, it's the ground staff? Is it some policy of the hospital? Because nobody touches the body and you don't know really whose body it is, and suddenly it's gone. And in such cases, mediation does help. If nothing else, to have a catharsis of what we call in mediation, you have a narrative mediation, maybe that might help, maybe something else. But certainly, some intervention is required, whether ad hoc or institutional. In my view, both should be given a try. Where institution has still not come in place, ad hoc should be initiated.
Yeah. Would anyone
Rayana,
else like to comment?
If I can quickly say, I think there is a huge mindset change that's required for something like this. What Mr. Prathamesh has actually just said is something that we hope that we will see soon, but this is a huge mindset change where we will need folks to be empathic in this kind of conversations. It's not just providing these platforms, but if you have someone representing the hospital or the doctors association, that person will have to be, coached into how to get into these conversations. You would have to have lawyers who are also understanding of the mediation conversation. One of the reasons why the NHS in the UK has done very well with and has seen a huge rise in in mediating medical negligence cases is because it's the lawyers who represent both parties every time, and they are there, they are observing, they play a huge role in helping both parties. They anchor their positions and interests. And I think that's going to be a crucial factor going ahead, because without that training, without that understanding, all these platforms mean nothing. So that's me ending with a lukewarm note.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good. What I'm going to do, we have to wrap it up now. There's a close of 3 days here. So what I'm going to do in one word, I'm going to ask all four of you one word to summarize the key benefit of mediation process for those in the medical patient arena. Pratha, one word, the greatest value of mediation is. Prathamesh.
De-escalate.
De-escalate. Anrup?
Love.
Love. Jonathan?
I think it'll be closure.
Closure. And last but certainly not least, Anna Plevry.
Apology.
Apology. Now I'm going to throw one more in there myself, peacemaking in a word. That's what we're all about in the INADR. RAYANA, any last comments?
No, I would just like to say that I had personally not known much about how mediation would work in the healthcare sector. And I think we've explored some really interesting and niche areas of discussion. And I think it's such an important discussion to have in light of everything that's happening. So I think I'd just like to thank everyone for coming and sharing your perspectives and your experiences with us and with everyone tuning in today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And it's certainly appropriate, namaste, since they're being based out of India here today, to all of you, to all our parties around the world who listen in here today. Want to thank these four speakers here and our original speakers, Dr. Kevin Brown, Mark Holstein, Beth, and Peter Ornstein in our earlier sessions today. Thank all of you. And if you can mute yourselves, please. At this point, I'm going to reintroduce Dennis Favaro, who's our president and International Academy of Dispute Resolution, and he will bring our 3-day World Mediation Congress to a close. So I thank you for this opportunity. All our speakers, one better than the other, it's amazing. I learned from each and every one, and it's a pleasure and an honor and professional honor for me to be part of this. So thank you. And RAYANA, she's off here now too. Okay, thank you. Dennis?
Okay, thank you, John. Our title for this World Congress was Common Ground, Using Mediation to Cool Off a Heated Planet. I think after 3 days, we can all agree that mediation indeed can be used to cool off a heated planet on a variety of levels in many contexts. The speakers today gave us unique into their respective topics that exemplify how mediation can indeed be used for meeting common ground in cultural issues, negotiating disputes involving environmental issues from external sources, and working with parties to address environmental interest. Today's sessions, like the session before, like all of the sessions before, has been most interesting and extremely informative. The panel discussion on healthcare services was outstanding. Again, on behalf of the International Academy of Dispute Resolution, much gratitude and appreciation is extended to our esteemed and prominent speakers today. Special thanks are also extended to my INADR colleague and co-moderator, John Legg, Professor John Legg. Your words were outstanding. And co-moderator, RAYANA MUKHERJEE. Thank you, RAYANA. Well done. And especially to the National Law Institute University. As mentioned earlier, the International Academy of Dispute Resolution has been in existence for 20 years. And the Academy is the oldest, most established, longest serving organization of its kind. For more information about the Academy, please see our website at www.inadr.org. In conclusion, on behalf of the Academy, its governing board members, and authorities, we thank again Loyola University School of Law, Nicholas Ramirez University, and the National Law Institute University as our academic partners for this Congress, and all of the excellent speakers who participated and made this Congress so memorable. Thank you all again. Thank you for joining us.